Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Welcome to our first episode of the Firefight series. Today we're going to take a deep dive into Enforcers. This is going to be episode 1 of the Enforcers series. We're going to kind of dive into Enforcers, and we're going to do a brief overview of this video, and we'll talk about things to come. The first episode is going to cover strategies, concepts, and a general overview of the faction. We're going to talk about strengths, weaknesses, and overcoming those weaknesses through play. And then we're going to talk about faction orders at the end. And, episode 2, we're going to start taking a look at troops units. And then we're going to kind of slowly break down all of the units and how we can get kind of some sort of use out of anything in their army list. Enforcers. Based on my concepts of the game, and again, I have limited experience. I've done one tournament, one pseudo tournament, and then I've run a tournament. And then I've played a lot of games in between all of that. And I started whenever Gen Con was. That's when I started. I'm just so everybody knows, like, this is what I do. I go to college full time. I do the YouTube. I'm medically retired from the military. So, like, I get a little bit more free time than probably most people do. So I use that free time to kind of like play games, to do research, to do videos. That's how I can get so much game time in. But yeah, based on my concepts and limited experience, I think Enforcers are a pretty elite army. And what I mean by elite is they're either low unit or low model count or a little bit of both. They do seem to have good units that can do anything and just a little bit of everything. They're kind of like this weird, almost a jack of all trades army, where their specialist units aren't hyper specialized. Instead, they're just like units that shoot but melee just a little bit better, or they're units that melee but shoot a bit better. So it's kind of this weird, not quite Swiss Army knife, but really close kind of way of playing. And I think Assault Enforcers are just a phenomenal example of this concept. They melee pretty well, but when you kind of compare them to, like Asterian's dedicated melee troops, they don't stand up necessarily. But then their shooting can really buff well with orders and stuff like that. And not that it doesn't stand up. Like if Assault Enforcers charge Khaleesi, they're going to probably win that assault. But if Khaleesi charge Assault Enforcers, Khaleesi are definitely winning that assault. It's one of those kind of weird, they just kind of fill this weird, almost do anything role. Every unit I've come across has some sort of charge reaction, and I think this is a very important thing because you need to learn how to take advantage of those charge reactions in order to maximize your lack of action economy. Your first couple turns are going to be a lot of like move into position, Overwatch, or maybe shoot and Overwatch, or shoot and then move away, But don't be afraid to kind of like have your first turn or two be a mulligan in order to get into better positioning. Don't rush into combat thinking you have to do your damage early. I see Enforcers being a kind of like mid to late game army where you don't need to jump immediately into the fray, and you actually almost don't want to. You want the game to be prolonged. You want this contact to be prolonged. The longer the game goes on for you, as long as you've positioned and played well, the more it's in your favor in most matchups. That's how I see them. Their strengths, well, I mean, for one, they're surprisingly durable. If you're an idiot like I am, you didn't even realize they had 2 hit points the first couple games you played. Really, I think it was just the first one. And I was just like, why are these dying so fast? These things are awful. Armor 6, pretty solid. They don't have like that Forge Father durability, but that's pretty durable for your troops. Now, you can't just slap them in the middle of the table and be like, these guys are going to live. But if you use your cover effectively, you're going to be able to withstand a lot more shooting than most other, units of equal cost in other armies. And they have some crazy good orders. 2 that stand out in my mind are Go, 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 which is you can't use it on a vehicle, but your whole activation is move, shoot, move. And that is great for fast units like bikes if you need to get them on an objective or maybe like into a corner if you're playing control. That is awesome for moving out, shooting, and then jumping back behind cover. Like, that has a lot of utility, and it gives an army that doesn't have a lot of fast options a surprising amount of maneuverability. Ready for every Ready for anything also stands out. It's one command point, and you get to Overwatch for free. You can boost it for one more command point, and then you're immune to being pinned. And that one doesn't have the vehicle restriction. So you can get pretty wild with that one. Like, that one's really good. And I can't recommend that one enough. I use that one every game. Both of these are the two that I use pretty much every game, every time I play. Command units give consistent dice. And what I mean by that is, like, the greens and the oranges are going to be pretty consistent. You're going to get command points consistently with those. And a lot of your command units in this army give you one or the other, or maybe two orange, right? There are some units that give you, like, multiple black dice or a single black die. But really, I just don't think you're taking those units for their command dice. I think you're taking those units for whatever it is they do, and then the command dice are just kind of like icing on the cake. Most of the orders do provide a lot of efficiency for your shooting. You know, you can increase your range and your AP and get marksman. I think to get all three is like 3 command points. Sounds right. I forget what that order's called. But you just have there's a command aura that gives you weight of fire 1 and vicious for shooting. So again, a lot of shooting buffing in this army, which feels weird because their melee units are pretty good. And they can, sorry, that was a bad segue. I thought it was going to say something else. It didn't. But Enforcer's weaknesses, they can end up with a low model count or a low unit count or both. And what I mean by that is, like, you could just end up getting out-activated. And if you're not careful, that means that people are going to be able to focus your units down. So your positioning is really important. You have to be careful about how you move and how you play. Again, they don't really have anything to buff melee. The Assault Enforcer Commander gives you 3 extra inches of movement as an aura. But that's kind of a shame because they have some good melee units. The Peacekeepers are low volume, but they're pretty solid. The Phase Claws are fantastic. Assault Enforcer's getting 3 dice at AP 1 with Elite, which is reroll hits of 1 in melee. Awesome. So it's one of those, like, they have really solid melee units. They don't really have anything that makes them more efficient in melee, which I found kind of interesting. And it's probably just because, like, that's not what they're designed for, you know? They're this weird kind of, like, mid to short range army, and you know, that's where they sit. And, like, their melee is good, but they don't want. I think the intent is for enforcers to not just be a solely melee army. You know, going back to what I said about out-activated, you can get overwhelmed if you're not careful also. If you spread your units out too much, you're going to get focused down, you're going to start losing units, and once units start coming off the table, the game becomes a lot harder. You know, their range is average at best with their guns, and what I mean by that is, like, most of it's just like 18 inches. There's a few things that are a little bit further, and there's ways to increase it a little bit further. But generally speaking, the range is just 18 inches, and that's it. And that's not bad. It's not good. It just is what it is. You know, so if you hit something with a longer range than you, though, you have to be aware of it and be like, oh, I need to adjust for this. You know, and like I said, they are, when I say they're kind of slow, I don't mean that they're like slow, like they don't move 6 inches. What I mean is there's not a lot to get them faster, you know, and 6 is like most of the army. You know, you've got some bikes. I haven't looked at the monocycles, but I'm sure that those are about the same speed as bikes. They just don't anti-grav. And so it's this weird kind of, like, it's a lot of foot slogging. It's a lot of just, like, moving, and that's why you need things like go, 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 or maybe the assault commander. When you want to overcome their weakness, I think list building is where you start. You don't want to only bring guns. It's tempting because all of their orders are just like shoot more goodlier, right? And so you're just like, oh, I'm only bringing guns because all these orders make my guns more gunnier. And, as tempting as that is, you've got to realize that melee and charging, it's not about dealing damage. The damage is nice, but that's not what it's for you. What it's for you is extra movement that you can combine with damage dealing. And what I mean by that is if a unit moves 6, you can move 6 and you can shoot 18. Now you have a 24-inch threat range, sure, but you still only have a 6-inch movement. Assault enforcers, they're going to do damage in melee, so you can sprint them. So now you have a 12-inch threat range. It's a lower threat range, but you have a greater movement. And if you win that assault, if they haven't activated yet, you've now just mitigated their action economy if you win that assault. So that's what enforcer players have to think about when they're using their assault units. Is, okay, if I charge this vehicle and I win the assault, it gets an activation token if it hasn't acted. It might not get a pin token. I'd have to double check because there's not much that gives vehicles pin tokens. I think there's only like 1 or 2 things. I know anti-tank, but I can't remember if, I think losing assault you don't. I'd have to look. But that being said, if it hasn't activated, it still gets the activation token if it loses the assault. So what you need to do is start using your assault enforcers to kind of pick things that haven't activated, slam them there. If you win the assault, you've now shut down their activation, and you can push things around a bit using, the fact that they have to run directly away from your sergeant. So now it becomes a, if we've got a unit that's like due north, I can come over here one turn, and if they don't move, I can try to charge them. Now my sergeant's here, I can now force them the other way. You see what I'm saying? So your positioning is important, because if you can position things well enough, you can kind of force things out in the open so that the rest of your army can either shoot it or charge it without getting a hindered charge, for example. So you still want to make sure you have some melee units. You don't want to just roll in with only guns. Plus the melee units, the assault enforcers have countercharge, and whoo boy, that will kind of pump some brakes, which is a good thing. When people have and a great example was round 2, I played a dude named Jordan at the Michigan GT. Fantastic guy. I'm going to do my best to not go on a tirade, because I am known for that. But he had a unit of 3 skyscrapers that came down, and it was a fantastic play. He had tri-pointed me. He had a couple units kind of in this little pocket, and I was like, oh shit, I'm stuck. And I told him right then, I was like, man, that's a slick play right there, dude. It was. He really got me. And what I think kept it from being devastating was the fact that those assault enforcers have countercharge. So I just left their activation for last, knowing that he wasn't going to charge them with those skyscrapers while they had countercharge, because if we do damage simultaneously, I'm killing all 3, I think it was 3, I'm killing all 3 of those skyscrapers, and maybe he kills 2 or 3 of my enforcers, but I still have a unit, and he's losing one of his more mobile units that can get him a lot of points and stuff. So that was one of those, countercharge really saved my bacon. Now, don't get me wrong, he still ended up winning, and, it is what it is, but he'd have really beat the brakes off of me. And to be fair, we only finished 3 rounds. We finished the whole game. He still wins, hands down. I don't question that. But I think we finished, the score was 19 or 20 to 9, 10. And I think if we finish those last couple of rounds, I think that score, that gap in the score gets a lot smaller. I think we're probably looking at somewhere around 16, maybe 18 to 22, because I was starting to kind of peel things. Things were going my way. Like I said, I don't think I win the game. I think he was a much better player than I was. He definitely outpositioned me. He outplayed me. But I think I maybe come in like second or third instead of fourth. But at the end of the day, I had a great time. It was a blast, and he was a really fun opponent that I learned a lot from. You also want to make sure you have 1 to 2 units with some speed. I like the jet bikes. Like I said, I haven't played with the monocycles yet. I think they have some play, but I haven't used them yet to confirm this. But a unit of bikes with or without the lieutenant, to me, auto include. I don't see a need for the lieutenant. I don't see what he does for my army. Headstrong is useful, but I have not played a game yet where I'm like, man, these pin tokens are just devastating me. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with how I play. And when we kind of get into that later, you'll see what I mean. I tend to cut the table in half, and I'm just like, well, you can have the whole other half of this table. And then if you pin me, I'm just like, oh, well, I'll just like use my action to shed it. It's not the end of the world, because then I can always just go into Overwatch if I need to or something like that. So it's one of those, like, a unit of bikes, auto include though, because again, you need that speed, and they're really good for pinning in a corner just to have like that late game rush up the table and grab an objective. Or you could be a dumbhead like I am and just kind of like slam them up the table super early and watch them die. Choice is yours. You do want to make sure your table has adequate terrain. I will have pictures later in the video where we talk about like how terrain should look on tables. And I'm not telling you you have to do it this way. What I'm saying is, having played in a tournament or two and now run a tournament, I see how and why you need more terrain for this game. Even though the ranges are smaller and the boards are bigger than compared to, say, like 40K, there's no wound roll, things are a little bit more lethal, and having that terrain to block line of sight and provide cover kind of cuts down on that and balances it out a lot and makes it really nice. The other thing you want to do when overcoming their weaknesses is you don't want to spread too thin. It's very tempting to spread out, cover the whole table. And first few games I played, that's what I did. And I was just like, man, this is brutal. I'm just getting my friggin' booty clapped. I don't know. I'm your host. But yeah, I was just getting my cheeks clapped like religiously first few games. And I was just like, I don't understand what I'm doing. And then I started looking and I was like, you know what? I bet. So I come from a Drukhari 40K background. And the way I play my Dark Eldar is I'm just like, I'm going to take this half of the table. You can have the rest of it. And then once I clear this half out, I'm coming to you. Like, don't you worry. I'm going to get there. And I play it as a late game army. I don't try to ramp points early. I try to kind of use my first couple turns as positioning, and then turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, hit the gas. And I've started to adopt that strategy with my enforcers, and I've had a lot of success since adopting it, since playing that way. I've probably played about 8 games, maybe 10, Michigan GT being one of them. And I've lost 1 game, and that was at the Michigan GT, and that was that game I lost against Jordan. And honestly, like, I would love a rematch now that I've played more games, just because, again, I don't know if he beats me or not, but he's a fun guy to play with, and I learned a lot, and I'd like to see if I've learned enough now to make that game a bit more competitive with him. But yeah, so just focus on half the table at the time. You know, if there's objective markers on the table and there's 4 of them, you only need to have 2. If you have 2 and your opponent has 2, your opponent's not winning. And so you just focus on 2, and then once you clear everything away from those 2, you just focus on the next one. You don't need to control all 4 at once. It seems tempting, but you don't have the trash units to run out and do it. Now, arguably, you could probably build a list with enforcers that could do it if you wanted to use like engineers and stuff, but I think then you're kind of doing yourself a disservice and not leaning into what this army does very well. Once you've managed to deplete their forces, you know, like turn 3 or 4, like I said, you start pushing, you start claiming more territory. And that just goes into what I just said. 1 and 2 is about like getting those early objectives that you need to stay in the game, but you're focused on depleting their resources. And then once you've claimed that chunk of the table and just kind of cleared them out, then you just move to the next one. And then you move to the next one. This should be a slow, methodical process. This should not be a bum rush to the middle of the board. In my experience, you know, they tend to play better if you plan to score later rather than sooner. And this is all, it's just a quicker way of saying what I just said. Now that we've talked about some of their weaknesses and how to overcome them, I'd like to look at some terrain setups, and then we'll take a dive on a virtual table. And what I mean by virtual table is we're going to have a picture, like just of a table, and then I'm going to get a pen and draw on it John Madden style. So let's check that out. Okay, so here's a look at one of the tables. This was at the Michigan GT, and obviously Brian, the TO, is the one that set this up. And as you can see, there's a lot going on here. Let's grab the pencil, and yeah, there we go. Just want to make sure we're working. You know, we've got these buildings. I believe they were height 4, anything this big. He did tell us. I paid attention at the time. This would have been 4. These might have been 2. And then the hills were varying depending on the height. So you had a lot of stuff. And if you look, like you have a lane, but the craters were treated as height 1. So really, for the most part, even if you could shoot across the table, you at least had cover. And then there were still things to hide behind. You had a height 1 barricade down here in the corner. You had this building. You had this building. Some rocks here. And then you could always run up. Like you had ways to get up the table. And so it was really good table layout. This is a good density of table. This is awesome. You know, this one was at a tournament that I ran. So this was my first crack at a tournament table. And you can't see the whole thing, mostly because the picture's a little wonky. But, you know, it's generally kind of symmetrical, and really it needs more smaller pieces. But that was something I had learned after running the tournament, is that I think the tables benefit from having more, like if I'd have had this cut in half and I could have put each half in different places, that would have been better than having one big thing. You know, so that's something I'm still learning. This needed a bit more, you know, something in here maybe, or up in here. They don't even have to be tall, just a lot more. And then instead of these big giant pieces, cut them in half and kind of like spread it out a bit more. So it's not a terrible table. I could have done a lot better, but at least there were places to hide. And it was still hard to get, you know, like cross the table shooting without at least drawing through something. This was another table by Brian, and again, you don't get to see it all because I guess the picture's being all wonky. But again, if you look, and it's generally symmetrical without being symmetrical, so it was fair without being 100% symmetrical. You've got the barricades, you got the hill. This is the Mason Labs game, if I remember right. Yep, I remember that thing right there. You can see my bikes over here hiding. You know, so we have this interaction where we've got these hills, we've got this thing in the middle, we've got these big giant buildings all over to help break up line of sight. So make sure you've got enough terrain. If you don't have enough terrain, you're going to struggle. And then here's one more picture. Actually, we already looked at this one. So now that we've talked about terrain a little bit, I'm going to talk to you about what I mean by like loading up a side or cutting the board in half. You know, if you look at this picture, and again, I know you can't see it all, and that's okay. You know, you don't need to see it all. Let me see if I can stretch it out a little bit so that you can at least get a better glimpse of it. There we go. That's a lot better. Okay, so if we look at this picture, I've got my Strider here. And that's because I know he doesn't have anything there that's going to kill me. I deployed first. He's got his Rainmakers there. But I knew he wasn't going to put him out here. Because if he puts him out there so that he can try to shoot my Strider off immediately, I'll trade him that melee Strider for his Rainmakers. And I think he knew that. So he just kind of planned for his Rainmakers to kind of chill. We talked about it afterward. He had his melee guys, the brawlers, whatever they're called. They're Rainmakers, but for melee over here. And we talked about how it would have been better if he'd have flip-flopped them and he'd have got more utility out of everything. But anyway, what I mean when I say like cut the board in half, you can see this is about the halfway line. I got my peacekeepers here, maybe. Looks like it. Can't tell. Nope, that's just shooting enforcers. So I've got shooting enforcers there. My peacekeepers are actually over in this corner here. And then my defenders are probably somewhere over there. These are just drones. Like I said, I literally just took whatever I had. But almost all of my army is in this section here. And then I've got bikes. You can't see them, but they're like way over here, just hanging out. And it's one of those, like, I just kept them over there, again, out of line of sight, to be harassing, to sit there and, like, score points, threaten an objective. Like, if he doesn't move up to take this, and he does, like, let's say he brings these like this, and just abandons this objective here, I can just I can just fly these bikes right up here. But what I ended up doing was, here's where I put him, and he had a lot right in this corner. And so my thinking was that, and I think this is a transport, because I think the other one was a gun truck. Well, I know one was a gun truck. I think this one on my left right here is the transport. But my thinking was like, okay, he's loaded up the same side I have. If I can clear that side out, I'm going to be sitting pretty. And honestly, it was starting to kind of go that way turn 3 when we ended up having to stop. And again, I think Jordan still beats me. He's definitely a higher skill player than I am at this point. I'm not sitting here saying like, oh gosh, I would have beat him if we'd have just played the whole game. But I am saying like, I would have scored a lot more points because it was trending that way. He had a lot. I don't know if you can tell, but there's works back here. He's got, I think, 2 or 3 squads back here, plus one in the truck. There's one here. And then he ended up bringing his skyscrapers in over here later anyway. So it's one of those, like, he loaded up the same side I did, and I just had to weather the storm. You know, that was kind of my approach, was like, okay, I just need to weather the storm. I need to focus on this. And honestly, what ended up happening is turn 3, when we had to stop, I think his Rainmakers were here, and I was able to get my melee Strider all the way into them. Like, I didn't get the +1 to hit. It was a hindered charge. But that Strider's going to do some damage to those boys, you know. Even if all I do is kill one, if I can put a pin token on them, if I can shut off their activation, because they're probably not doing anything to him in return, because he's got heavy armor and they don't have anti-tank and melee. So there's a good chance that maybe they do a damage. All I need to do is 2 to 3 damage. If I kill one model, that's awesome. That makes them way less scarier. And then if I can get into him and like kill one and shut off their activation and get a pin token, cool. So that was kind of my thinking. But yeah, turn 3, I ended up getting him here. And so the strategy really worked. You know, I ended up bringing guys up this way. I did not bring anything this way for the most part. These boys, I can't swear to you what they did the whole game. Honestly, there's a good chance I just like sprinted them over here and then sprinted up here. Like, these were more of a, like, if I can and the opportunity presents, I'll go this way. But more likely, looking at this board and how everything played, I'd be willing to bet that these came up, and then these came up, and then I just abandoned this whole side here. And was just like, this is yours, Jordan. You can have it. The downside was that Jordan also loaded up that side, and because of the efficiency that I had, I was able to kind of like start grinding him down. The problem was that he had mounted so many points in the first 2 to 3 turns that I just could not, there's no way I could have come back. You know, I don't think. Maybe, maybe not. I just don't think I could have. You know, I think he beat me like 20 to 9. So I would have had to have scored a lot of points those last 2 turns. So again, I'm 99% sure I lose, but the strategy worked. I just needed to get better at it, And that's what I mean when I say, hey, load up, cut the board in half, claim that half of the table. This is mine. And I'm going to write mine on here. And then you just start depleting people, and you bleed them dry by focusing on half of the table. Now, if you deploy like this, and then they just kind of mirror what you do and they match your energy, and then they deploy over here, that's not bad. Like, they're just giving you half the table then. And that gives you a lot of freedom to decide what to do. So if they just mirror you, you can go this way, you can go this way, and you can make those decisions based off of how they've deployed, right? And where things are. So like if they had a tank back here, for example, that could lock down here and could lock down here, you just go this way. Cool, I don't have to mess with your tank. And that's kind of what I mean when I'm like, hey, cut the table in half, cut the table in half. It works. It has worked very well for me. I won 2 games at that tournament. I won 2 games at a much smaller event. It was kind of like a little local, I don't know if you can call it tournament. There's some people, I think there was 4 people there. And this guy I knew had just kind of like decided to run and host it. So it was one of those like, tournament's probably not the right word. Like it was back-to-back games. But again, I've lost since figuring this out. I've lost 1 game with this army, and that was into Jordan at the event. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to lose again, but I've played since then with this army probably 6 to 8 games. Played Asterians last week, and I just did exactly this, cut the table in half and just hammered him. He had the witches, I forget what they're called, Khaleesi, and he had a bunch of the things with shields. Again, I don't know, they're drones, whatever they are, with the shields. And then the tank with the shields, so you got to like kill the shield before you can kill the tank, and the shields can regenerate. And I was just like, fine, I'm going to kill your Khaleesi first, because they're easy to kill. And now you have to use all your meaty stuff to score points. So that's what you got to look at. And a big part of this army is also target priority, which that's probably a big part of any army. But again, that goes into what I was telling you. You got to understand the trade game. He's got these, they're effectively witches, Khaleesi, whatever they're called. They got the bows and the melee, and those things throw a lot of dice. So I was just like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to kill those first. And once they're dead, I'm going to make you use your more specialized units hold objectives. I'm going to anchor you on objectives, and then I'm just going to shoot you off, or I'm just going to charge you off. So it was one of those like, this is a great starting point for people who are struggling with enforcers, is to just take the table, cut it in half, load up one side with about 80 to 90% of your army, and then have 1 or 2 really fast units back in this corner. And again, you want to make sure you're looking at terrain, figure out the best place for them, but you want them there so that, like, they can kind of hop up here, grab this objective if they need to. They can do whatever they need to do. Because again, in this situation, if he ignores this, or let's say he's got regular commandos, which he did dump some commandos up here at some point, so maybe this one was the transport. But anyway, some regular commandos did eventually make their way here. I can always move, go, try to shoot as many of them as I can, and if I can like cripple them, hop back on that objective. And not only that, with these guys here, I can move, hopefully get enough out that if he's out in the open, I can kind of like get a lane on him, shoot him, then move, shoot, move, so you have a lot of options. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to load up the list. We'll kind of go over what my list was, and then we'll kind of talk about orders while we're talking about the list, and then we'll wrap this up because this is looking to be probably an hour to an hour and a half long video. So I'm pretty sure this is what I ended up taking. I'll know whether or not it was in a couple minutes once we start digging into it, but I'm 99% sure. Um, so I took one command unit. It was my Peacekeeper Captain. And again, part of this was just because this is what I had. But once I started playing it, I was like, okay, this is actually pretty viable because I had a lot of units and there were a lot of boots on the ground and I just had a lot of interactions. I really like the Peacekeepers. I feel like maybe they could get another hit point, and maybe I'm just nitpicking or bitching. And again, I come from 40K, so to me, these are like the Terminator analog, and they just don't quite feel Terminator enough. Not that they're bad. I like them. I play them every game. I've yet to put this army on the table and not bring them. They do have anti-grav. They are inspired, or he is inspiring, so he's got the 6-inch reroll. Resilient 1, which for them is pretty good. With Armor 7 and Resilient 1, that's pretty spicy. He does give you a green die, which I like. They do have Controlled Fire. So, if you've got an Overwatch token, you can shoot people when they charge you. If you haven't activated, you can shoot people when they charge you. And then his orders are the Firestorm aura. And that's the one, let's go ahead and... Weight of Fire 1 and Vicious is what that gives you. And that's a big 12-inch bubble. So that's really good. Weight of Fire doesn't sound like a lot, but if you've got that Strider with the Polaris cannon, 2 shots hitting on 4s with a single die reroll means you're statistically hitting both times. So it's one of those, like, not a terrible thing to have. I had 2 units of Enforcer Operatives. It was 1 Sergeant and 3 rifles and a burst laser. The Sergeant, I gave the pistol and the energy gauntlet to. I don't know if that's the right play. I honestly did it for aesthetics. Because again, when I built these, I had no clue what I was doing. I was just like, these look cool, let's do it. Looking back on it, it's fine. The pistol I could take or leave, but what I do like is that the gauntlet gives you an extra bonk. In a unit that's putting out 1 die, that gauntlet gives you 2 dice and it's AP 2. So, depending on what charges you, that could be the difference between winning and losing an assault. I do think he's probably better off with a rifle rather than that. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to complain. It worked out just fine. The burst lasers are awesome. I love them. They do a real good job of crowd control with enemy infantry. 4 dice hitting on 4s, giving out pin tokens. Phenomenal, phenomenal weapon. And then the Gendling lasers are awesome because they're trademarked. So there's a lot of buffing that you can do with those. So you could make the argument that just 5 enforcers with Gendling lasers, really good. But you have to plan to invest a lot of resources into them if that's how you're going to run them. So we had those 2, and again, they have advanced training, anti-grav, controlled fire. Then we had 2 units of assault enforcers. Again, the sergeant had the energy gauntlet. I like the gauntlet here just because of the extra AP. I did have 4 extra enforcers. That's right. I had to look at the way the list was kind of structured here. So it's just 4 dudes with the wrist blades and the pistols. Again, the pistols are trademarked, so they can benefit from some of those orders. And then the other thing to note is that the assault enforcers, I didn't have any, so I didn't, but you can give them phase claws. So for 5 extra points, you get an additional attack and reroll hits of 1. But you lose any shooting is the downside. I think a unit of those could just be devastating, just through weight of dice. Like 5 dudes throwing 15 dice at AP 1, hitting on 3s if you charged, rerolling 1s. Like, that is so nutty. Now, there's going to be units that it's not going to be great into, but at the end of the day, really good. Now, 2 units of that, some Enforcer drones, and again, these were more of a, I don't know what to take. So I'm just taking these because I think I had like, yep, I had like 60, 70 points, and I was just like, man, I don't know what to fill these points with. So I just took the Enforcer drones and was just like, cool. And I might have actually only had 55 points because I might have adjusted this list for another game and taken something off of here. I think I did now that I'm looking at it. The drones, they're not bad. Again, the shotguns are not trademarks. You can't really do anything with them, but they are 3 dice each, hitting on 4s, and they do have pinning. And then I never used elusive. But elusive is when somebody shoots you, you can force them to re-roll a number of hit rolls equal to their elusive value. So it's resilient, but for hitting. So it's one of those like totally forgot it was even a thing. Never used it the whole game, like the whole tournament. Uh, oh well. And then Enforcer jet bikes. Like I said, these things are awesome. They're elusive. They have evade. They have scout. They have anti-grav. They have advanced training. 2 hit points. They move 12 or 18. And then I had one with a Dominator, one with the Burst Laser. I think that's a great loadout. Now, they can take a missile, and a missile would be good if you know you're going to need some anti-tank. And I think all of the base units, let's find out. Can the base units? I think they can. Enforcer operatives, can they also take missiles, or is it just the... Yeah, you have a lot of options here. That's what I was trying to remember. So, that's what I was kind of going, like, talking about earlier when I was just like, oh, they kind of specialize. So, you can take, like, a missile launcher, or you can take a fusion rifle, or whatever you want to, and it's going to be good. So if you know you're going to need a lot of anti-tank, those assault or those regular operatives, you can just slap a missile launcher in there, and while it might not kill a tank, if they know that they could potentially eat like 3 or 4 missiles just from 3 or 4 different units shooting, that's going to make players think twice about when they want to poke something out. Again, sometimes it's not about how much damage you can do, it's about your potential to do damage and that deterrent that can cause. I took a squad of Peacekeeper Defenders. Again, this was purely an aesthetic pick. I messed these things up every time I played them for that first tournament. And that's mostly because they had a lot, and I just honestly, they didn't interact with the game most of the time. Defensible is awesome. They can just overwatch for free after their activation. They have controlled fire and countercharge. Again, Dominator rifle, burst laser. Looking back on it, I almost think I take... because they either get the incinerator or they get the burst laser. But the incinerator is just like, eh. Like, it does have it burns, which can be good. But, man, I'd rather have 3 shots at AP1 with the Dominator. To me, that incinerator is not worth 5 points. And maybe, again, I'm nitpicking, or maybe I just haven't run into the situation in which that incinerator is real good, But I'm like, man, if I could get 2 Peacekeeper Defenders with Dominators and then one with a Burst Laser, I'm throwing 10 dice, and that sounds pretty good. And 6 of it has AP1, and that's kind of where my head's at with it, Then I had 2 Striders. Nope. So, yeah, I was just like 65 points shy, and that's how the drones ended up in there, because I didn't know what to do with 65 points. I love the Striders. I think they're fantastic. And honestly, when I played at the Michigan GT, a lot of people were just like, oh, I don't think I've ever seen an Enforcer player really play those. But, like, Homeboy here, Tank Buster, the Polaris Cannon, range 24, 2 dice, AP4, anti-tank, devastating D2 +1. So that's meaty. That's real meaty. Give me a second. Check something out real quick. But I loved it. It's one of those, like, the heavy armor. Yeah, it's armor 7, but the heavy armor means that you've got to dedicate a good amount of shooting into it. Now, it will just die to, like, a bajillion Marauder attacks, for example. But, The other thing to keep in mind is with anti-tank weapons, they give out pin markers to vehicles. I think that was something we kind of messed up too. I think we've been giving them out to everything, and I think they only give them out to vehicles. So that's something to keep in mind. It's one of those like controlled fire, real good. It can shoot when you charge it. Not that you really want to with its 2 dice. Its assault weaponry is meh, but giving it marksman, which is reroll hit rolls of 1 for shooting. So you've got, 2 dice hitting on 4s, rerolling 1s. If you get them in the aura of the Peacekeeper commander, you're hitting on 4s, rerolling 1s with weight of fire 1. So you've got a pretty good chance that you're going to be able to reroll both dice. It's not, I wouldn't say a good chance, but it's not bad either. So it's one of those like, that was a good take. I really liked it. And again, there was games like the game against Mason Labs where it didn't really do anything, but he had to respect that it was there, and it caused him to kind of like, ooh, I don't want to mess with that. That looks mean. So, and then I took a regular Strider with the chainsaw. It gets 4 attacks with Frenzy 1, which is weight of fire, but for melee, it is AP 3. Again, I like it. The heavy flamer I could take or leave. It's fine. I didn't use it that much, but again, I'm still kind of like working out flamers and figuring out how to make them feel good when I could just take things that are better. And better's probably not the right word, but I just feel like flamers are situationally good. But the chainsaw, pretty solid. My only real gripe about the chainsaw is that, that thing's massive. I feel like it should at least have seismic. It feels weird that it's like a vehicle-mounted melee weapon, and it doesn't do anything special to vehicles. And again, maybe I'm just nitpicking, and I'm not trying to say like, oh, poor me, my enforcers don't have this tool. I'm talking from just a logic standpoint. Like, I'm looking at this model. He's got this massive chainsaw. It looks like it should shred tanks. It doesn't shred tanks. But overall, that's the list. We've got 10 total units. 4 of them are troops, 3 specialists, 2 support, 1 command. And if I were to change anything, there's a chance that I kind of try to work in that assault enforcer commander. He's pretty spicy. Like I said, that extra movement aura is really nice. Now let's take a quick look at the faction orders while I have this up. We're not going to go crazy in depth with it, but precision fire. All trademark weapons in the unit gain the marksman keyword and bonus AP. So you get reroll hits of 1 and AP 1 for your Gendling rifles. That's pretty meaty. And then for another command point, you get to extend the range by 6. So for 3 command points, it become 24 inches, hitting on 4s, rerolling 1's AP 1. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. The high velocity ammo can give a trademark weapons the anti-tank keyword and bonus AP. So this is one of those where I just now saw this. And now that I know this, I feel like some of those matchups, I was like, ooh, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. I feel like that high velocity ammo is how I'm going to deal with it. Like, if you're bringing a lot of, like, for example, Forge Fathers who have those high durability troops, to me, high velocity ammo is going to be your answer to that. Because, and what you want to probably do is like the highest volume you can do. Maybe you don't want that burst laser. Maybe you have 1 unit that's just laser rifles, just so you can get those 10 shots, and maximize the amount of dice you're throwing. Go, go, go. Oh my God, it's so good. You can't use it on vehicles, but you get to move, shoot, move as your whole turn. And then ready for anything is 1, and then it boosts for 1. That's what it is. So it's 2 command points. It's 1 command point. You get put on Overwatch at the end of your activation in addition to any other actions you performed. So you get to Overwatch for free. And then for an additional command point, you're immune to pinning by any means until the end of the round. This can be put on a vehicle. So again, kind of meaty, being able to just like Like if you had the big burst laser guy, or even, just anything where you just be like, ha. And where I found that worked really well, though, was my assault enforcers using this, charging them into something, and then being able to overwatch after I won the assault. Because that counter charge, like I said, if I like into the plague, he didn't really know how to deal with that. Because he didn't want to sacrifice something in order to charge my stuff. And we'll kind of get into that. I'll take a couple minutes at the very end to kind of talk about that. The council expects, as a long action, this unit may perform 2 shoot actions with all its trademark weapons, but may not reroll any to hit rolls for any reason. And the second shoot action must target a different unit. Non-trademark actions may not be used during either shoot action. Again, this is one that you probably want just like all Gendling lasers or something along those lines for. It's a really good one if you need a lot of volume. If you're just like, I am going to, again, like if we look at zombies, for example, or the plague, and they've got like a unit of zombies and a unit of ghouls, and you're just like, cool, I'm just going to put 10 shots into each. Really good for that type of stuff. Not necessarily great into maybe like other enforcers or things like that where you're trying to shoot, or like high armor things. Not great for those, although with enough volume you'll at least do damage. And then shock resistant armor. This is one I've never used, but I know it exists. And then you can't use it on vehicles, but you can shut off blast and devastating on weapons targeting this unit. Any successful hits only do a maximum of 1 damage each, which means it would also shut off toxic. So that one, situationally good. One of those where I've never been in a position where I've like, oh, I should use this instead of something else. But it's good to know that it's there. And then we have Firestorm. So again, very, very good. Very, very good orders. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back over to the table. No, we're not going to do that. We won't worry about that today. This is actually where we're going to end it. So again, thanks for watching. I hope this helps everybody. I hope you found this beneficial. And if nothing else, like, tell me how I can improve. Make sure you leave a comment below that says, hey man, I like this, but you could do this better, or this is what I'd like to see. Thanks a lot.
Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to talk about Firefight by Mantic Games. We're going to do a bigger dive into our second episode of the Enforcers. We're going to take a look at all the troops. Before I dig in, apologize if I look a little rough. I've got the shingles, and it's been an experience. Fortunately, what I've experienced has been much more mild than what I've had people describe to me, but that's like all this stuff under my neck. That's what's going on. That's actually why I haven't done any other videos yet, as I've just been in and out of the doctor taking care of this. For those that don't know, shingles is just chicken pox, but in an adult. When you get chicken pox as a child, and yes, I'm old enough that I didn't get the chicken pox vaccine. I actually got chicken pox. And so when you get it, it actually stays dormant in your body, and then it can come back later in life. And it's just adult chicken pox. It's not fun, it's not comfortable, but like I said, fortunately it's been a pretty mild case of it for me. So that's why the radio silence for the last week or two, and I apologize. This has been going on for about 10 days now, and I'm actually getting ready to head back to the doctor again so I can get prescriptions and stuff like that. So just to get that out of the way, that's what's going on. Here's what I want to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the troops. We're going to talk about, we're going to look at all the troop options for enforcers, and we're going to discuss what each one might be able to do, what kind of role it could have on the battlefield, and we may touch on what orders or command orders might be good with each unit. I don't want to get too deep into it because most of the units can benefit from most of the orders in some capacity, but if there's one or two standouts, I may bring that up. Before I dig in, there's some things that I want to say up front. Playstyle is going to dictate opinion on how units work. So you might play a unit and think it's the best thing since sliced bread, and you have great success with that. I will never tell you not to play something, right? Like if you come to me and you're like, oh, Chris, why do you play this? This is trash. Well, it works for me because I figured out how to make it work and it fits the way I play the game. So when I say this, I'm going to kind of rank them. Know that this is coming from the perspective of somebody who prefers a more melee-centric style of game. Somebody who, even though enforcers seem to want to do more shooting, has leaned more heavily into their close the ground, get into melee, and that type of stuff. So my perspective on it is going to be different than yours. If you disagree with me, I'm not saying don't tell me. By all means, tell me, because I try to be open-minded enough to at least learn about what everybody else is doing and see how I can incorporate that into what I'm doing. Like, that is my goal. My goal isn't to sit here and tell you, this is good, play this. My goal is to tell you, here's how I see this. If you see it differently, please tell me, and then we can collaborate and we can talk and we can figure out things that work better for both of us. And it just makes everybody a better player. And so when you go through this, if you see something you don't agree with, please, by all means, tell me in the comments. But do it in a way that's like, hey man, here's what I like, blah, 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 blah. If you're rude, you're disrespectful, I'm just going to shut it down. I'm not in the YouTube content creation business to start arguments, but I would like to start discussions, if that makes sense. It's rarely been an issue, but I just wanted to touch on that immediately and get that out of the way. And just let you know, this is all coming from the perspective of a 40k player who has played a lot of orcs and a lot of Drukhari, so a lot of go fast melee. So that's kind of my mindset and my way of playing the game. So it may be different based on your perspectives. So the first one we're going to look at is the engineer team. They are 60 points, and I will say, like, first of all, for an enforcer unit, they're really cheap. If you put the rifle on the sergeant, they come at 65 points for 3, which is what, 16? It's not 16 points or 15 points a model. I don't know why I said that. It's like 22 and a half points a model, somewhere in there. Evidently, my brain wasn't working. Again, have been sick. So forgive the bad math. It would have been 45 points if they were 15 points a model. The drone does add 2 more shots, but they aren't trademark to the squad. The drones are really different. I'm kind of mixed on them. But they're a great, cheap unit for screening and camping. Yes, it's only 3 models, but I'm not looking at the cost per model. I'm looking at the cost per activation. And you're still getting 6 hit points. I believe their armor it's either 5 or 6. I know the Pathfinders are 5. I don't remember if the Engineers are 6. They're probably 6. But you're still getting 6 hit points on the table for about 60 to 65 points, and there's nothing wrong with them. They benefit from any order. The 3 main models in the squad, they have trademark weapons, which means they can get high velocity ammo, they can get precision fire, they can get the council specs. They're all very usable. I don't know that you really want to spend command points on them, but if you needed to, if you were in a jam, you'd have that option. I would personally look at them as more of a throwaway or trash unit or a scoring unit. There are some missions where you need the hacker keyword, which I believe they have. I'd have to double check that in order to score bonus points. But also, you can get 2 of these squads for the price of 1 regular enforcer squad. Now, they are auxiliary, which means they don't unlock other slots. So you're going to kind of run into that as an issue. But again, as a early activation, dart them onto an objective maybe and force your opponent to have to react to them. If you lose them, oh well. You're out. A 60-point squad, that doesn't really offer you a ton if you keep them bare naked. If you soup them up, now we're talking about a bigger points investment. I just don't necessarily see the reason to do that. I would probably, from my perspective, look at them more as here's a cheap unit I can put on the table, and if it dies, it dies. A lot like I treated my drones when I went to the last tournament at the Michigan GT. You know, I looked at them as, I'm going to move them up the table. If they die, oh well. They're a fairly cheap squad. They don't really do much. I wasn't even playing them right anyway. I didn't use half the rules on their thing because they were just like a last minute throw them in because I needed some points. You know, so that's kind of how I would look at engineers. Peacekeepers are 90 points. And honestly, I didn't even realize these were troops. The Peacekeepers I ran at the tournament were part of the command retinue. So I took the Peacekeeper Commander, who gives you a green die. And then I just brought a couple of base Peacekeepers with him rather than a troop selection Peacekeeper. They're 90 points for 2 models, which means they're spicy. Like, that's a lot of points. They are not cheap, but they bring a lot to the table. You know, they're armor 7, they're resilient 1, so it's going to be a little bit harder to like spam them off the table with some troop fire. You know, weight of dice will still kill them. Like if you get 10 marauders, you know, 10 commandos into them, not commandos, brawlers, whatever the melee ones are. 10 of the melee marauders into them, you'll probably kill them. But they do have counter charge and controlled fire, so you have different options for your charge reactions. You know, so again, if somebody's charging you and you went into Overwatch or you haven't activated, you can either countercharge or you can shoot them. And depending on how many models you have in the unit, I'd probably just shoot them because it's more dice. You know, you get 2 attacks in melee because they all have the energy gauntlets, but the Dominion rifles are 3 shots. And it's one of those where, sure, there's situations where maybe you want the melee instead, but the Dominion rifles, I think the Dominion rifles are some of the best weapons that the Enforcers have. 3 shots, AP1, they're very versatile. I mean, there's certain things they won't do much into, obviously, like, you know, like a Tunneler or a Forge Father's tank, because those are like heavy armor and AP, or not AP, heavy armor and armor 8 or 9. But at the same time, like, they're just really good rifles that'll work into almost any other infantry and smaller vehicles very well. And that's actually the next point we're going to talk about. You know, Dominator rifles, really good. They don't have or trademark, which, whatever, that's not the end of the world. It does limit what orders they can really benefit from. You know, a lot of the really spicy, like the shoot twice orders, require trademark weapons. Seismic gauntlets are pretty good. They're AP2, like I said, they're 2 attacks base, which means you don't want to get them in with something that's going to out dice you. I wouldn't charge them into ghouls, for example, because the most, if I had 2 of these, you know, at 90 points, and you can take almost 10 ghouls at 90 points. If I take 2 of these, the most I could ever kill is 4 ghouls. But those ghouls are going to throw so many dice that if they get a good roll, they're going to win that assault every, you know, most of the time, just because of weight of dice, right? We have an expression around here. It's if you can't roll hot, roll lots. And that's where these are going to struggle, is into units that rely on rolling lots, you know, because that's not what they're there for. But you could put them into things like, I wouldn't put them again into like a Forge Father tank or especially not a Tunneler. Maybe a Forge Father tank or a Wolverine, but not a Tunneler. The Tunnelers just throw too many dice, like way too many dice. Like 6 attacks coming back from 1 vehicle, not even worth messing with. But something that has a lower volume of attacks, definitely worth trying to charge them in if you can. They can take Phase Claws, and I really like Phase Claws, but I haven't gotten to play with them yet. I haven't gotten to test them yet. I'm going to try to get that done hopefully this weekend, grayscale permitting. You know, so we'll see. I like them. The main thing with the Phase Claws is they are only AP1, but they do give you 1 extra attack die, and they're elite, so they reroll 1s to hit an assault. And actually, I feel like the Phase Claws might be different on the Peacekeepers. We're going to look real quick, because I feel like they were different on the Peacekeepers than they were on the Assault Boys. So let's double check that right now. I could have, do we do it on the screen? We just do it on the screen. Take less time, and you get to see it. Peacekeeper captain, peacekeepers. We're just going to go to, let's just add a unit of peacekeepers because this isn't submitted for a tournament. Advanced training anti-grab, blah, 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 blah. So let's go here. All right, so these peacekeeper phase claws. So the peacekeeper phase claws are AP2 and elite. So I would definitely lean towards those over the gauntlets just because of the extra die. Sure, they don't have seismic, so you're going to reroll heavy armor into 5s instead of 4s, but getting the extra die to me is worth it, although you are losing the shooting because to take the phase claws you're giving up the Dominator rifle. So again, it's just, what do you want out of them? Do you want a unit that's going to throw a lot of AP2 melee dice, or do you want a more balanced unit that's going to give you shooting and it's going to give you fighting? And it may be worth the mix and match. Like take a unit of 3. Let's go back over here. Take a unit of 3, and I think that's actually in here. Drop the rifle, pick up the extra attack, reroll 1 to the hit and assault. Maybe you put 1 or 2 into the squad, or just take a whole dedicated melee unit with counter charge that's going to really be a good charge deterrent. People will look at that and they'll go, well, if I charge that, I might kill them. But they're going to be swinging, if it's unit of 3, they're going to be swinging 9 dice hitting on 4s at AP2. Like, they're going to... I don't know that anybody wins, you know what I mean? Like, they're going to look at that and go, maybe nobody walks away from this a winner. So I like the phase claws. I do need to test them. I've got some built. One of my buddies got a 3D printer. We bought the STLs from the Mantic site, and man... got them all primed, just got to get them painted, and I really want to get them on the table. I've got some pretty high hopes for them. If you take the defenders, which aren't, because I don't think the base ones can take that. I might have just been an idiot. Yeah, I didn't think so. So let me delete that. Peacekeepers. Boom. You can't take a burst laser or an incinerator in peacekeepers. You have to take them in the defenders, and they're not troops. So sorry about that. Like I said, haven't been feeling the best, and some of this I'm probably going to be a little bit inaccurate on just because of my brain not being right, and I apologize. From there, we're going to move to Pathfinders. They're 110 points. They are armor 5, but they do have pretty good shooting. They're single shot at AP1 with Vicious and Marksman. So they're going to reroll damage dice of 1. They're going to throw a unit of 5, throws 5 dice, hitting on 4+, rerolling 1s to hit and 1s to damage with a 24-inch base range. The one shot makes me a little leery because 5 models doing one shot is just whew, man. Now, they're not going to clear hordes, right? But they're going to get their damage through. They're going to be pretty good into tanks, right? So if we go to Pathfinders, bam. Let's take a look at them. Vicious, Marksman, Vicious, Marksman. So that's it. And then they do have Scout and Controlled Fire, which we're going to get into. But anyway... it's one of those, they don't have the trademark, so again, you're not really buffing them to give them, shoot twice or the anti-vehicle shots. But if you've got a more elite infantry, not like a Forge Fathers per se, but like an Enforcers or even like Nightmares, if you've got a squad of Nightmares, they're going to put damage on something like that pretty well. Or even Tunnelers, they're going to be all right into. Not Tunnelers, Tunnel Runners. They'll shred ghouls and base rats and things like that. They're going to be good into elves, but you want your Genling lasers for the shields and then follow up with these. You don't want to shoot with these first for the shields and then follow up with the lasers, although a lot of elf armor's pretty low, so it may not even matter. For 10 points, you can put a cloak on them that gives them stealthy. And in my opinion, this shouldn't even be an option. Just raise the cost of the unit 10 points, and they always have the cloak. I guess, to me, like, the way I look at it is it's worth the 10 points to just try to protect this unit if you're going to use them. Giving them cover, giving them -1 to hit. They only are armor 5, but they're 24-inch range, so they've got a longer threat range than a lot of your other guns and shooting. So if you're going to put them on the table, to me, it's worth 10 points to give them a -1 to hit. The drone you can get does bring a burst laser. It's a 15-point drone. It shoots 4 dice that pin. Again, I will... If it can take a burst laser, I'm probably putting the burst laser in the squad. Just because... And I had a discussion a little bit with this in the comments in my last video, which I will, put up here right now. But it's one of those where I look at burst lasers and I look at incinerators, and I see the value in incinerators, but I have just not seen more of a value than I get out of burst lasers. That's kind of where I look at it. Not that the incinerators are bad per se. It's more just... And it could just be what I play against most often. I play against Plague, I play against Marauders, I play against Asterians, and some Forge Fathers, and the Burst Lasers are kind of meh into the Forge Fathers, but the Incinerators would be too. Like, those are just that, like, they're just, it's the way it is. So I'd rather have the 18-inch range gun that almost guarantees I get to pin you, like I just have to hit you, than the 12-inch gun that requires me to, have you fail a nerve check in order for it to do anything. And that's just kind of how I look at it. Again, I know other people have had great success with it, and it could largely depend on how they've built their list, could largely depend on what they're playing against most often. So that is always a viable option, just from my experience in the game. And I have run some Flamers, I've just not run them on the boys, because I've got the Strider with it. My experience is that the Burst Laser has just been better for me. Overall, for their points, the only thing they really do that base enforcers don't do is scout, but they're still a little cheaper, 20 points. You do up their cost 5 more with the drone and the cloak, however, so like they are 5 more than base enforcers if you give them all their upgrades, because they're 20 points cheaper. The drone's 15, the cloak's 10, so we go up 25 points. So it's one of those, like, they're about the same price as base enforcers, and the only thing they really offer you is a gun with AP1 and a single shot that isn't trademark, and then that's it, like in Scout. You can take a single sniper rifle for 10 extra points, and again, I think that's one of those things where if you're taking the Pathfinders, there's no reason not to take a sniper rifle. You can use this to snipe out machine guns and heavy weapons inside of squads, which can be very beneficial. And then you have other units that could bring snipers that arguably fill the role better, though. Like, you can get the monocycles. Same with the scouts. There's just better things that do what they do. And again, I'm not looking at how they interact with command units or anything else. I'm literally just looking at them in a vacuum. So, you might look at that and go, yeah, but if you take this Pathfinder leader, you get this or you get that. And that's super fair. I'm just looking at them in a vacuum as they look on the paper right now. And then as we progress and dig through this and we look at the leaders, then we'll talk about how the leaders can kind of correspond with the different units and troops. So, again, keep that in mind when you're watching this. I'm just looking at their data sheets as they are in a vacuum. But again, the sniper rifle might be worth it. It does also, like I said, give you something that can threaten things. You might have a unit of Marauders or something that's got a pinning weapon, and if you can shoot them and take that pinning weapon out, it can make your life a little bit easier. Assault Enforcers, they're 130 points, man. I think these are bee's knees bread and butter. I absolutely love them. I have never run fewer than 2 squads in the games that I've played. I think they're fantastic. I think they're a great charge deterrent, and I think they just do everything. Their pistols aren't amazing, but they're pretty good, and their melee is pretty solid. Countercharge is a great deterrent against other melee units and armies. The squad throws 10 dice at AP1 with their base loadout and hit on 4+. You could take an energy gauntlet on the sergeant, or you could take phase claws on any of them. The energy gauntlet does give the sergeant AP2 and seismic, and he keeps a pistol. The phase claws get rid of the pistol, but you get an extra die that rerolls hits of 1. Now, the assault enforcers phase claws are AP1, but again, 5 assault enforcers, if you give them all phase claws, 15 attacks, rerolling hits of 1 on AP1. Homie, that's gonna chill a lot of units out. And again, I've got some decent examples I'm gonna bring up in a minute. But that will get, especially weaker units to just kind of pump those brakes a little bit. Phase claws are really good. Again, haven't put them on the table. Conceptually, they look really good. I am going to probably take a single unit, all phase claws. The problem is that I can't put them in the unit with the phase claw commander. He can only take wrist blade assault enforcers, which I thought was weird. And I'll double check that, but I'm 99% sure that is how it interacted. Which, again, I thought was weird. You know what? I've got it up. I forgot I had it up. We've got the assault enforcer captain. So he can take... Yep. These are enforcer defenders. These are assault enforcers. And that's with the wrist blade. And these are assault enforcers. And then you can also take one medic. So I just found it kind of weird that homie can take phase claws, but none of his little boys can take phase claws. Because he's fantastic. I've already talked about him. But anyway, let's delete you. I think they're great. I think they have a lot of utility, and even with just the base loadout, again, I can think of a couple of interactions where people were like, I don't want to mess with that. And one that I mentioned in the last video is, playing Jordan again, the Marauders game, and that one sticks out a lot because I learned so much in that game, but also because it was a lot of fun. He was just a great human to play with, and all the people at the Michigan GT were. But that one really stood out because he and I had a lot of good banter. It was a lot of good talking. He was a lot of fun, a lot of learning. It was fantastic. So he had and I mentioned this, he had the skyscrapers, and the only thing that kept them from just like screaming up the board at me was countercharge. Because again, yeah, he'll probably kill some, but because of countercharge, we're resolving simultaneously. So he's going to trade a whole unit of skyscrapers to kill maybe half a unit of assault enforcers. That's not a good trade for him. But if he could get his damage in first and kill half my unit, that's going to really mitigate my ability to put damage out against him. And then I played Plague round 1, and I used my assault enforcers. I charged them into, I think it might have been zombies, ghouls, something like that. He had a hero kind of like tucked into a little pocket. It was like a little pocket around some terrain that you couldn't really move through. And he had it tucked in there, giving its aura out. And I had charged the unit that he had there right in front of it. And I used the order that lets them stay in Overwatch. So I charged it. I won the assault. His unit ran away. I got my 3-inch consolidation. And then he had that pocket with his unit in here. And I just took that unit of assault enforcers and then made a line in front of his lord, his plague lord, and it was just like, the only way you're getting out of here is if you charge me. You're not walking through me. And then so what ended up happening was he charged me with, I think it was some leapers. I don't remember. He ended up charging me with something. And we resolved our damage simultaneously. I won the assault, stayed in Overwatch, and then I think I had 3 assault enforcers left. He did 2.5 damage there. Or killed 2.5 assault enforcers. Or, yeah, because I had 3, but the third one had 1 hit point left. And so they were just still stuck there, and he was just like, oh my gosh, these are brutal. So again, I just think these things are fantastic, but I come from a very just like melee focused mindset. To me, melee isn't about doing damage as much as it is about extra movement, board positioning, in Firefight specifically, activation control. So there's a lot of things going on here. That was a lot of words, and I'm sorry. The other thing is, if you do take the pistols, they shoot on 5s, so don't really expect a lot. They can buff because the pistols are trademark, but really you're doing this as like a last resort. Like, maybe you need to shoot twice with your pistols. Maybe you need to give them 6 extra inches of range and give them marksman and vicious, or whatever it is. Maybe you need to give them anti-tank for some reason. Again, it's one of those like, you're probably not going to want to spend the command points on them, but if you have the pistols, it's nice to know that you could if you needed to. I always take the gauntlets on the Sergeant. I've never really had seismic matter a ton, but the AP2 is nice. And like I said, haven't tried the phase claws. Probably getting a game in with them this weekend. And like I just said, a lot of the orders don't really affect them outside of the ones that like do. And I know that doesn't make sense. And what I mean by that is because they're a melee-centric unit, there's not a lot of melee-centric orders. The Assault Commander does have an order of 3 plus 3 inches of movement, which that would benefit them. Getting a 15-inch charge would be very meaty. Enforcer Operatives, 130 points. You could take their base rifles trademark, 2 shots, no AP, 18-inch range. Because they're trademarked, they can get bonus range, they can get AP, they can get marksman, they can get anti-vehicle, they can get anything under the sun. The first 3 you can get from a single order, so you can get bonus range, AP, and marksman. I believe it's 3 total command points, because I think it's 2 with 1 boosted. It could be 1 with 1 boosted, but I doubt that. That's a lot. I think it's 2 with 1 boosted. And then the anti-vehicle comes from a different order. But that anti-vehicle order also gives them bonus AP. So again, if you've got a vehicle and you're just going to dump your troop shooting into it, especially if it's not heavy, like if you've got a plague mule or like a jet where it doesn't have heavy armor, there's no reason not to use this order on them because they'll become AP1 with anti-tank. So if you do any damage, that vehicle gets a pin token. That's awesome. That is awesome. The Sergeant can take gauntlets and a pistol. So I don't know that it's worth 5 points, but I did it. And a lot of the reason had nothing to do with I didn't know anything about it. Again, like, was relatively new when I did the Michigan GT. I had played like 1 or 2 games, didn't really know a ton about what was going on. And so I was just like, the gauntlets look cool. Let's just give them gauntlets. I don't know what happens. So if I were to do it over again, and I have the models, I'm probably going to. If I were going to do it over again, though, I just put the base rifle on him to give me 4 rifles. The gauntlet's handy, and I've had the gauntlet and had it kind of save me a little bit. Like, this guy gets 2 attacks, so I've managed to squeeze an extra damage into something to allow me to win an assault. But it's not reliable, and I just don't know that it's worth it when I could have 4 guys with a rifle giving me 8 shots and then 1 guy with a special weapon. So, and having the extra rifle makes them even better because they have controlled fire. So if you charge me and I haven't activated or I have an Overwatch token, I get to shoot you. So if I have 4 rifles, I now get 8 shots instead of 7 shots if I have the pistol. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but it does make a difference. They have a lot of special weapons options. There's one model that can take a special weapon. You can get a thermal rifle. They're kind of spicy. They're a little shorter range though, but they do have targeting systems. They're AP4, anti-tank, Dev D2, sorry. And I think you can actually take 2 of them. Let's find out. Again, I apologize. I just was a little goofy. Nope, just 1. I don't know why I said 2. Oh, you can take 2. You can take 2 in a squad. But again, these are cool, but they're very short range. But you can still use like high velocity ammo, which will give all your rifles anti-tank, so you can just throw a ton of anti-tank. But like I said, the thermal rifle is very short range. They've got to be close to do what you want them to do. So it's just things to keep in mind. The other special weapon options, you can take fusion guns. They make pretty good crowd control. They're 2 shots, but they have blast 2D or D2 plus 1. So they're pretty likely to hit, and they're pretty likely to give you bonus hits. Like the worst you're going to do on average, right, is even if you only hit with 1 die, you're guaranteed to still have 2 hits. But again, the issue becomes it's 9 inches in range, so you've got to be very close with them, and that's not necessarily bad, but that's not necessarily where you want them to be anyway. At least not the way I've experienced them. I tend to keep them in that like 12 to 18 inch range. Like I'm trying to keep them out of charge range as much as I can when I'm shooting them, things like that. Again, burst lasers. Holy cow, I love these things. They're 4 shots. You could take 2 of them. That's 8 shots that can pin, and you can throw that at a single, squad. And like I said before, if you can't roll hot, roll lots, man. Just like up your dice game, son. But if you want to go big, you spend 20 points each, and you take some missile launchers. They're Dev 2, not Dev D2. They're Dev 2. So they got big damage. They're anti-aircraft. So they'll work on. I don't know why I said jets. Oh, jets. My brain said jet bike. See, I told you, like, I'm still not right. So they'll really do quick work onto things like jets. Anti-vehicle is going to punch through a lot of heavy armor. AP4 is going to make them really brutal. And 36 is some of the longest range you have in your army. So 36-inch range missile launchers, really meaty. And they can benefit from the Peacekeeper Command Aura, so like you can give them Way to Fire 1, and I believe it's Vicious. Way to Fire 1 and Vicious for shooting. So, 2 of them in a squad, pretty expensive, but if you have 2 Enforcer operative squads on the table, that's 4 missile launchers you can kind of like have spread out all over the place. Again, it's a good deterrent to keep people from like poking things out that they would normally like feel really comfortable just throwing out there. Every order benefits this unit. Again, if you take the base loadout, you can get 5 Genlings. That's 10 dice. So now your orders are way more efficient. They're cheaper, but it also limits their role, and they become more generalized rather than specialized, and they become more of a resource sink. Did I do another one? Probably. Nope. So they become a bit more of a resource sink. And that's the thing is like, they're going to be really good into base rats, the Night Stalkers. They're going to be good into zombies. They'll be fine into ghouls just because of volume. You've got 10 dice or 2 shots per guy. So if you take squads of 6 or whatever, that's fine. So it's just one of those like, they're not bad that way. It just, you're now declaring that this is going to be a resource sink in order for them to operate outside of crowd control. In order for them to operate outside of the confines of just like, I'm going to shoot and just throw dice at things. Whereas if you've got the burst laser, you can fire that at almost any infantry unit, and it's still useful because of the pin token. The missile launchers, you can fire at anything, and it's just, if it hits, like, it's taking damage most likely. So again, that's one of those like really interesting things where it's like, you keep them cheap, you keep them generalized, but then that you've got to spend orders in order for them to do what you want them to do. Because being able to throw 10 AP1 anti-tank dice isn't terrible, and it's going to, again, keep those like transport jets from screaming up the table, because they're gonna be like, oh heck. So that's my take on them. Enforcer Defenders. This is another Armor 7 troop. they're 28 points a model-ish. I forget exactly how they break down, because I think it's squads of 5. Let's double check that. Enforcer defenders. And I'm only doing this because, like I said, I was on the beginnings of my illness when I wrote this, and I haven't checked it, but I wanted to make sure we recorded it and got back in there. And now I'm like, oh gosh, what other stupidity did I do? So yeah, 5. Yeah, they're about 28 points a model. They get a shotgun, and they get assault weaponry. And then they have anti-grav, defensible, controlled fire, advanced training. Pretty standard stuff, right? So let's go back to here. Shield does give them defensible, like I said. And it effectively means they can always use controlled fire. As long as, well, yeah, because they just get to Overwatch for free. That's what defensible does. They're extremely short range. 12-inch shotguns. They're not trademark. They don't pin. They don't do anything. They're just shotguns. They do have knockback. Sorry. Pinning shotgun as a points upgrade on the drone. Of the drone upgrades, I'd consider this one's fine. Like, they have a few other drone upgrades. The pinning shotgun's a solid one. There's one that gives a command tactician black die, which would be fine. And then there's a mind layer, which, the way I understand it, it does 3 AP1 hits automatically when the squad is assaulted, and that counts towards combat res. So if you charge into them, you're just taking 3 AP1 hits off rip before they even shoot you, and then they still get to shoot you, as long as they get their charge reaction. So these are, like, again, they're intended to be a charge deterrent. The drones are not cheap. It's almost as much as just taking another body for a lot of the drones. Now, the knockback does mean you get a bonus die when you are charged, as long as the charging unit was within 6 inches when they were charged. It's okay. It just means, it's one of those weird things where it's like, it's not bad. It's not good. It's situational. And there's going to be times where you're like, man, I'm glad I had it. But I just feel like either they just seem very underwhelming. And again, if you've got good experiences with them, please tell me. Because I look at them and I just see something where it's like, I don't understand the purpose in these. Because I feel like they would benefit from maybe like if they got 2 dice in melee instead of 1, even at no AP. Or like if their shotguns also did pinning the way the Accutech shotguns do. I just feel like they're outshined by Peacekeepers. Even though Peacekeepers are giving you less wounds, I feel like they do more for the points, right? Because Peacekeepers, I think you could take 3 for almost the same price. So you're getting 6 wounds or hit points instead of 10. And they're not defensible because they don't have the shield. But their guns are better. They're able to countercharge or shoot. Their melee's better. So it's just one of those, like, I look at Peacekeepers and I look at these and I'm like, I'm going to take the Peacekeepers every time. So if there's something that, you have come across with the regular base Enforcer defenders, please tell me. I love the models. I just can't justify bringing them when I kind of read what they do. The Breach and Eradicate Enforcers look neat. They're quality anti-vehicle melee. They are very low volume, so, roll hot, not lots. They're AP4 anti-tank, devastating D2, 5 attacks total. So if you roll well enough, you're gonna eviscerate Broncos, mules, things of that nature. But you're still gonna want to make sure you're softening those heavier targets before you send them in. You're still gonna want to shoot like the Tunneler or the Forge Father or the tank or the Wolverines. You're gonna want to shoot those with your missiles or something first before you send these homies in. Because 5 attacks can go really well, but it can also just go really poorly. And that's really what keeps me from really putting them in a list, is they're just too low in volume. Like a single attack each is just too low. Because I'd want to charge them into tanks, I'd want to charge them into vehicles, but like, there's just better tools for that job. the Strider is a better tool for that job. And I don't mean the melee one. I'm talking about the one with the Polaris cannon. Sure, it's only 2 shots, but I also can be 24 inches away, and it's heavy armor. So they're just, again, it's just a better tool for the job. And the thing to keep in mind is if you do run them, you also need to be aware that you don't have to kill the vehicle. You just have to win the assault. So again, it's one of those like, winning the assault activates the vehicle if the vehicle hasn't already activated. So that is a thing to keep in mind, is you don't have to win. Or not win. You don't have to kill it, you just have to win. But it's, like I said, it's just that volume. Because if I have line of sight and I'm hitting on 3s for a straight charge, like, that's still iffy. I could still get 2 hits. And then it's like, man, maybe I wound you, maybe I don't. And then, like, if I only do 1 damage, there's a very real chance that I lose that assault. And even if I don't lose any models, I'm in a bad spot. So again, that's just one of those, like, it's so iffy. I want to like them. They look neat. I'm still kind of working out the best way to use them, and I think the best way to use them is, like I said, you soften your target up with an anti-vehicle shot, or at least get an anti-vehicle shot to pin your target to give it -1 to hit, and then shut off its ability to react if it has any kind of charge reactions, and then send them in, and then hope that you can just get a couple damage through, and then everything else stacks up enough that they just struggle to do anything to you, and you win the assault. Like, that's how I see them. But 150 points for something that is such a one-dimensional unit seems a little weird. Overall, I think the Enforcers have some great troops options. A couple of them feel a little redundant. Like I said, I think the Defenders and the Peacekeepers are a bit redundant. They could probably do a very minor rework to kind of take some of that redundancy away. And I'm by no means complaining. There's a lot of options here. It just feels like some of these units are just a touch redundant, and maybe something very minor just to kind of separate them a little bit more, or maybe there's something I'm missing. So again, specifically looking at like the Defenders and the Peacekeepers, if you've got good experience with Defenders, please, by all means, like, let me know. Let me know what it is you're doing, because when I look at them, I'm just like, eh. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to rank them from a like best to worst. And again, this is completely subjective, and this is based on my experiences of the game. This is in no means intended to like incite riots or arguments. What it's intended to do is promote discussion. So if you've got different experiences with some of these troops, by all means, let me know in the comments. Say, hey man, your video, I disagree with it. Here's why. So that I can take a look and kind of see your perspective. Like, I come to every game with a learning mentality, not a I know everything mentality. So when I give my opinion is being given with the intent that if you disagree with me, we'll collaborate and we'll figure out not what's better, because again, I don't want to know what's better. I want to know what your experience is, because if I can see how you're doing it and it fits the way I want to do it, I can adopt it. And then same, if you can see how I'm doing it and it fits the way you want to do it, you can adopt it. It's just better to get different perspectives on everything. So that's where I'm coming from. Personally, I think the Assault and the regular Enforcer Operatives, best of the troop units. They're the most flexible. They are relatively cheap for what you get out of them. Each unit can basically benefit from every order that you have. There's nothing that would be wasted on either unit. They are both situationally very good with pretty much every order, and then couple that with the fact that like the Assault Enforcers are a great charge deterrent, and they have a 12-inch charge threat range. I just think they're super good, and they just have so many good options for them You know, the shooting enforcers can take the special weapons. The assault enforcers can, but I think you're just better off either loading them up with phase claws or keeping them with the wrist blade pistols. Keep them cheap, or keep them, you know, like high volume. That's where I think they are. I think Peacekeepers are probably going to be where I would rank second best. And that's just because I think their base loadout is so good. The Dominators are a great combination of volume and AP and efficiency. Countercharge and or controlled fire with the Dominators and energy gauntlets is really good. Phase claws look like a very viable, great option. And phase claws, like, those are going to be like, oh, those are meaty because of the volume. You know, I charged something. It was like one of my first games, and I was like, oh, these guys are tough. I'm going to charge them into something. And then I killed like 2 models. And then the counter swings happened, and I was like, oh, that was kind of dumb. You know, so it's like, looking at the phase claws, I think if you're going to charge with them consistently, you want phase claws. If you're just going to kind of send them into lighter vehicles and then use their shooting to kind of pick off crowd control stuff, I think you just keep them with the Dominator and the Gauntlet. And that's, again, what I like about the Peacekeepers, is that they can kind of fill a variety of roles. I think Engineers and Pathfinders are effectively tied. The only reason I don't put Engineers higher is because of the Auxiliary. They're just a cheap unit that can benefit from pretty much everything as far as orders go, and they make a great utility or screening squad. Like 60, 65 points. You throw some Engineers on the table, they can run around, they score some points, and life is good. Pathfinders are still pretty cheap. They're just less cheap. They aren't auxiliary, but they do have Scout and the Stealth option. The only issue with them is, like, 5-up armor isn't great. And their rifles are solid, but, you know, like I said, they're not going to do the heavy lifting. You know, you've got one shot at AP1. They are marksmen. Like, they have some buffs. But it's just like, I could just take Peacekeepers that get 3 shots at AP1. Would I rather have triple the amount of shots, or would I rather have marksman and whatever, you know? I think it's marksman and vicious. And it's just like, it's... And again, there's probably something with Pathfinders I'm missing. There's probably some sort of, like, leader unit that gives them something. Maybe there isn't. But I haven't dug into the Pathfinder side. I know that's, like, there's, like, the big Pathfinder drone, and they have all this stuff. And I haven't dug into that side yet. But to me, they're just kind of tied right there with Engineers. I think the Breach and Eradicate Enforcers are next on the list. And that's simply because, again, and they're kind of expensive. They do have a role. It is clearly defined. But what their role is can just be done by other units, but better. Not necessarily troops units, but other units. You know, there's the heavy squad. You can just bring 5 missile launchers. They do literally the same thing the Breach and Eradicate Enforcers do, but at 36-inch range. So, and sure, they're more expensive, but I also just have 36-inch range missile launchers, right? So it's just kind of one of those where it's like, at 150 points, coming from a competitive perspective, I just can't justify bringing them. If they had something that really benefited them as far as orders go, I would probably, like, change my mind. But to me, they're just a little bit too expensive for being a one-trick pony that doesn't really benefit from anything. And I think the Enforcer Defenders come in at just dead last. Like, I just feel like they're discount Peacekeepers, even though they're cheaper by a lot when you break down their per model cost. And then you got to bring a drone to really make them feel like they're worth bringing, and that just ups their cost, right? Because they're 140 for 5, but I think the cheapest drone was like 15 points. But I think the rest of them were 20 to 30. And honestly, like I said before, if they had the Accutech shotguns instead, I think now we're talking, right? Like, they give pinning, they have an additional die. I haven't put them on the table yet, so once I play a game or two with them, I may change my mind. I just keep looking at them going, you know, I look at these and I look at just base enforcers, and I can't see a single reason to take these over base enforcers. So again, if I'm missing something, please let me know. I appreciate it. And then that's going to wrap us up. We kept it at under an hour. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Next, we're going to look at some of the command units. And then we'll be looking at support and then specialist, probably in that order. Who knows? We'll see how things go. Big shout out to Military Gaming Command. If you guys have not heard me talk about them before, check their website out, militarygamingcommand.org. They are a nonprofit that is run by veterans, so it's very near and dear to my heart. They use gaming to build communities and to support wounded and injured and disabled veterans. They do a lot of really good work, and I've worked with them a little bit here and there on some projects. I've run some fundraisers for them, and I'm looking to get back into it as I kind of work through some of the health issues that I've had over the last 12 months.
Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to talk about Firefight. We're going to continue our Enforcers deep dive, and today we're going to talk about Commanders. We're going to look at all the command options for the Enforcers and their potential retinue and bodyguard units, however you want to call them. And that's just the extra models that you can take inside of a command unit. We're going to look at those. We're going to look at each unit individually, and we're going to look at their auras or orders and how those auras or orders could be used. And then, we're going to do this in the same order that they appear in the list builder. And then we're also going to do, just like we did with the troops, we're going to do a little bit of like a ranking system at the end. And as always, I'm going to give you my disclaimer. My ranking system shouldn't be viewed as like the end-all be-all. It's really based off of the fact that I tend to play a more aggressive melee-centric playstyle when I play games like this. And so if you don't agree with me, by all means, don't agree with me. Let me know what you like, and let me know if I get anything wrong in the comments. Speaking of, I appreciate, real quick, want to give a shout out to everybody in the Firefight communities that have reached out or have liked and subscribed my videos. That does help my channel grow, and I do appreciate that. So if you're watching this and you like Firefight and you haven't subscribed, just hit that subscribe button for me. Thank you. And then before we dig into the video, I do want to give a big shameless plug. I do get ad revenue on YouTube, but I also like to throw out some Amazon affiliate links occasionally. So if you like Firefight and are looking to get into the game, there's going to be an Amazon affiliate link for the 2-player starter set that features the Enforcers and the Marauders, as well as an affiliate link for Command Dice. So the 2-player starter set does give you everything you need to play. It's going to give you, it'll have the rule book, it'll have Command Dice, all the models you need to play for Enforcers, and then also Marauders. So it's a good box. That's actually how I got started in the game, and it's a fantastic box. So that being said, links in the description. Thank you for the support. Let's move on to what we're all here for. We're going to start with the Pathfinder Lieutenant. Again, we're going in the same order they appear in the list builder, and then we will rank them afterward. He does have Inspiring, Scout, Small Unit 1, and Tactician. The Tactician is a single black die. That didn't transfer over. When I first did these, I thought I was going to list all of the unit abilities, and then I realized I didn't really need to. So the structure or format will kind of change as we progress, and that's okay. I just wanted to give you the heads up. The command order for the Pathfinder Lieutenant is target acquired. It's resolved instantly for 1 command point. You mark an enemy unit within line of sight as tagged, and then until the end of the round, all shoot actions against the tagged unit by units with tag pistols or tag rifles get +1 to hit and weight of fire 1. So reminder that weight of fire 1 is you get to reroll 1 die when you roll the hit roll. Obviously, if it was weight of fire 2, you would re-roll 2 dice. So you re-roll you're allowed to re-roll a number of dice equal to what your weight of fire rating is. Whew! Homie's got a base loadout of a tag pistol, which is just 12 inches, 1 die, AP 1. It does have vicious, which is re-roll 1s on the damage die. So that, again, if you're coming to 40k, there's no wound roll. It's really just hit and saves. So this is basically like re-roll 1s on saves, but you're rolling your saves. Again, if you're coming from 40k, the easiest way to look at it would be you roll hit and you roll wound. There's no armor save, damage is done. That damage die is almost like a wound roll.
And I'm only trying to break that down because I know a big portion of my viewership or my subscriber base are 40K players. So that's kind of why I try to draw these analogs. So it's re-rolling ones on the second roll to confirm damage, basically. And those are not optional. The Vicious is not optional. You have to re-roll them. And it does have Marksman, which is re-roll ones on your hit roll as well. He has a 2-die assault weapon. There's nothing special about it. You could give the tag rifle for 5 additional points. That does make it 24 inches, but other than that, it's the exact same profile. And then Crypsis Cloaks for plus 10 points. And then the Retinue, those are the extra models you could take in the command unit. You could take up to 4 Pathfinders with a tag rifle. And those, like I said, 24 inches, 1 die, AP1, Vicious, Shooting, and Marksman. I'm going to put a card up in, like, wherever they show up. I'm just kind of pointing randomly. We're going to put a card in, and that's going to let you know that's where I broke down troops, so we can kind of talk about in that video how I feel about Pathfinders. It's worth watching if you've not seen it. I will say at 50 points, it's a pretty cheap command unit to be able to put on the table. It does only give you 1 black command die, but really that black die is not why you take the Pathfinder Lieutenant, because there's just better command units if you're taking them for the die. The command order really only affects Pathfinder units, which honestly it's just things that have tag pistols or rifles, not tag cannons. So it only affects those tag weapons. It doesn't affect anything else, even if it's tag. And really what I think the Pathfinder Lieutenant is for is you take it for this order, and then you're building your force specifically around Pathfinders. That's kind of how I see it. It's more for like a theming force. I could be wrong. And that's not to say it wouldn't be competitively viable or good. It's just, it doesn't seem to be kind of, I can put this on the table and it'll affect my whole army. It's, I'm going to put this on the table to affect these specific units. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm simply saying that's how I interpret it. If you're gonna bring the Lieutenant, I think it's worth bringing a couple extra Pathfinders. The volume of fire you get from tag rifles is very low, but they will benefit from their own order because you give the order, you resolve the order, and then you get to do your actions. So they would benefit from their own order, and that'll only just serve to give you more Pathfinders to benefit from that order. So again, worth bringing extra Pathfinders if you're bringing the Lieutenant. Plus, they're fairly cheap. They're still 2 hit points. To me, you take the Cloak. There's no reason not to in almost any situation unless you just simply don't have points. But to me, 10 points is worth it to give you Stealthy, coupled with, you know, like if you have cover, stuff like that. So Stealthy is -1 to hit against ranged attacks. That's effectively what it does. And, you know, you take the Cloak, even if you don't bring extra Pathfinders, it does have, I think it's small unit 1, which would stack with Stealthy, stack with cover, so all these things could stack up so that Homeboy could be -3 to hit. You know, so that's one of those, like, to me, 10 points for the Cloak, worth it. 5 points for the rifle, worth it. Pathfinders are a ranged unit, so there's no reason not to bring the rifle, in my opinion, unless you're literally just taking it by itself for the forward observer ability. You know, if you're just taking it as a lone model and you're just going to kind of poke it out and spot things, then maybe you don't take the rifle. But Pathfinders are a shooting unit, and there's no reason not to make them shoot better. We're going to move on from there to the forward observer. This is an interesting one. Anti-grav, inspiring, scout, all the standard stuff that you get. It is stealthy baked in, and it does have tactician 2 black dice, command order, first strike, and it's an aura, and it's 2 command points, and all friendly units within 12 may add 6 inches to any ranged weapon, excluding weapons with it burns keyword, which makes sense, when performing a steady aim action. We're going to dig into the order in just a little bit. I think it's situationally a very good order, but it's one you have to build around, and we'll kind of touch on that later. His base loadout is going to be a Genling laser rifle. It's 2 dice with trademark. The laser rifle is awesome. There's a lot of flexibility that goes in with the laser rifle. There's other orders you can do to make the laser rifle better. But given that it can only take Pathfinders, there's not really a reason to use those orders. Energy Gauntlet, it's 2 dice, AP2 Seismic. I love gauntlets. I think they're really solid weapons. I don't know that they're worth it on the Forward Observer, but you can spend 10 points to give it a sniper rifle. And it just comes down to what do you want out of your Forward Observer unit. I think if you give it a sniper rifle, you take a couple more snipers with it. I think if you leave it with a laser rifle, you take maybe a couple Pathfinders with it. But it's one of those where there's no reason to give it a sniper rifle unless you're bringing more sniper rifles. Again, if they're just sitting still, they can benefit from that order, and you can have 42-inch range sniper rifles. And the snipers are 34 points a model, which is kind of pricey, but like I said, 42-inch range sniper rifle, your opponent, unless there's something extremely durable, they're not going to be wanting to just like run their units out into the open. If they have to risk losing, like if a person playing Plague, for example, has to risk losing their heavy machine gun or their grenade launcher or anything like that, being able to choose what models get killed could kind of help suppress, for lack of a better word, those enemy infantry that are trying to come up the table at you. For 75 points, you do get, like I said, just a standard Enforcer profile. It does provide 2 black command dice, which is pretty good for the points. You got 3 hit points, armor 6, 2 black command dice. I think the command aura alone is worth taking it. It's not locked to non-vehicles, and it's not locked to trademark, but it is locked to steady aim, which is, basically you spend your whole turn to shoot. But there's a lot of interaction there that could get spicy. If you've got Peacekeepers with Dominator rifles and they don't need to move, maybe they're holding down an objective, you can now push those to 24 inches. That's 3 shots per gun at 24 inches at AP1. Those are really good guns. If you've got a Strider with the Polaris cannon, it's now 30-inch range. So it may not even have to move when it benefits from this aura. So it's one of those, it does require positioning, it does require understanding where everything's at, but if you've got a 24-inch range anti-tank gun that's now 30-inch range, there's going to be some matchups where you're now outranging your opponent rather than being the same or being outranged. So again, I think it's situationally good. Missiles go to 42, and missiles are spicy. There's just so many units that could benefit from this buff. Even if you have assault enforcers on an objective, the fact that they could just sit there and now they have 18-inch range pistols, like there's just a lot of interaction there that's really good. You do need to use the steady aim to benefit from it, but like I said, that's a big buff for an army that's generally medium and short range. It pushes them to that medium almost into long range, like kind of just shifts them a little bit. And I think it's a solid take. Again, we're going to dive into it a little deeper at the end when we do our tiering. Honestly, I think the retinue, I'm not sure that you need it. With small unit 1 and stealthy, the FO is going to be -2 to hit inherently, so it should be relatively easy to hide. Maybe you take a couple Pathfinders, but I think this is a unit that's going to need to move a lot unless you lean into the snipers, because you want to make sure you can put that aura where you need it. So unless you're taking snipers, I just think you take it by itself and you run it around so that you can maximize where that aura can go. The Enforcer Captain, 80 points for an orange die, and then, again, standard Enforcer profile, +1 hit point because it's a commander. Command order for the Council. All friendly non-vehicle units within 15 inches can remove a pin marker. I don't think this is bad. I don't think it's great. It's situationally good. And if pinning is a mechanic that you as a player struggle with, this is a great way to mitigate its effects. If you wait till late turn, you can remove a bunch of pin tokens before you do your nerve check. If you do it relatively early in the turn, you could free up, pin tokens so that you can get multiple actions with your units. So it has play. It's not a bad take. I just don't think it's the best take. I'd honestly consider this like a middle tier kind of ability. And simply because so far in my games, when I've played Enforcers, I've not really had pinning be an issue. And it could just be because of how I play, but I've not run into too many situations where I was like, man, I wish I could have removed that pin token. But again, your experience could be different. So know that if pinning is something that like really puts a hamper on how you interact with the game, it's a good take to help mitigate that. Now, Homie does have an interesting retinue. You can take up to 2 Enforcer operatives with the Genling loadout. He's got the Genling loadout, or she, it doesn't matter. It's got the Genling loadout. You can replace one of them with a medic. And medics are interesting. I've not really used them yet, so I'm not really sold on whether or not they are worth. I think there's probably some situations where you want them. If I remember right, they give their own unit resilient 1, and then they can replace a model. So ultimately, I don't think they're bad. I just haven't played with them enough to be like, yes, this is worth it, or no, it's not. You can take up to 3 Enforcer defenders. And like I said a couple minutes ago, I already talked about troops. Again, I'll put the card up. It should be around the 5-minute mark. Maybe I'll throw it again here, which is going to be around the 15-minute mark. But they may be actually kind of good in this situation. By themselves, they don't feel like a very good unit. But when you're putting them with a captain or a command unit, that armor 7 actually matters, right? And even just taking 1, the whole unit gets to use armor 7 until that defender dies. And that's just based on the way the words are worded. I'm not wrong. It's just based on the way the rules are worded. You can use the best armor stat in a mixed unit. They will lose defensible because your keywords don't carry over. But really, you're just maybe taking 1 for the armor buff. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the way mixed units interacts gets changed recently. And that's just based off of a conversation I've had in the Firefight Fanatics, Facebook group. There's been some conversations there, and it sounds like something is going to end up changing at some point, because the defenders are 28 points. But then the defenders, when they're in their own unit, are 28 points. And they actually lose access to all of their normal keywords. So you're paying the same points for a unit that does less. So I don't know if it's just going to be a points adjustment or if the way keywords interact is going to change. But it sounds like there may be a change coming at some point. But again, I don't think it's a terrible take in this specific situation, because you're only talking about 1 model, maybe 2. But they're not worth it to take a whole unit. It does give you a single orange command die, and orange command dice are pretty good. Trademark rifle, again, has the Genling, so it can benefit from most of the orders in the Enforcer retinue, or repertoire, I should say. The command order, like I said, it's situationally good. Again, I've not run into too many situations where I was like, dang, I'm pinned. I wish I could be not pinned. But that doesn't mean I won't, and that doesn't mean other people haven't. I think the bodyguard options are solid. You can take more trademark weapons. You can get potential of 7-up armor. Like I said, the defenders are just a little bit expensive, but we'll see how that goes. The Assault Enforcer Captain, 80 points for a great aura and an orange die. And when I say great aura, I mean this is one of the best Enforcer auras. All non-vehicle units within 9 inches may add 3 inches to any advance or sprint move they make. So as an aura, and only being 9 inches, this means your positioning is going to be important. But adding 3 inches to all your advance or sprints, it's really good for an army that, like I said, I think the way I play them, they have to kind of keep moving. And that gives Assault Enforcers a 15-inch threat range with anti-grav, which is really good. I'm just going to effectively teleport over this wall. I'm just going to jump pack over it and still charge you. And so, it really gives them a nasty threat range. You get to move 9 inches for your base shooty fellas, 15 inches for the bikes. So it just adds a lot of mobility to an army that doesn't necessarily have a ton of mobility inherently. A lot of your mobility with enforcers comes from the use of your orders. The fact that it has countercharge instead of controlled fire is an awesome charge deterrent. Not that controlled fire isn't, but it's been my experience that people are more likely to charge my regular enforcers with controlled fire because there's no AP and they're -1 to hit than they are to charge into my assault enforcers with countercharge because we're resolving damage simultaneously and there's no -1 to hit. And it just means that, there's a good chance I'm going to win that assault if it's a full squad, unless you just have tons of models. So that's been my experience with countercharge. So again, I think countercharge is very underrated from my conversations I've had so far. It's very undervalued in the Enforcer's toolbox. Definitely worth having. It does have a base loadout of Gendling Pistol and Wrist Blade, which is just the same as the base Assault Enforcer loadout. For 10 extra points, you get Phase Claws, and I think that's worth it for the captain. You get an extra attack, you lose the pistol, you go up 10 points, but it's an extra attack and you're elite, so you reroll hits of 1 in the fights. And the Assault Enforcers really are just a dedicated melee unit anyway. The fact that they have a pistol just kind of shows that enforcers are kind of this weird, do a little bit of everything with just a minor specialization. I looked at the retinue and it doesn't make a lot of sense with this unit, and I'm wondering if there's maybe some typos or some sort of errors that need to get cleaned up. The fact that they can take defenders is interesting, and I guess it makes sense, but this is a melee unit. But then the defenders in this unit have a different weapon than the defenders in literally every other unit. Base defenders get shotguns. The defender in the Enforcer Captain retinue gets shotgun, but the defenders in the Assault Enforcer unit get Gendling laser rifles. It just seems kind of strange, and maybe that's intended. It just seems very weird. And honestly, I don't know that that's necessarily worth it, because it's effectively a dedicated melee unit. Sure, you can take a laser rifle, and there's nothing wrong with it, but you're spending 28 points to take a laser rifle and get a 7-up armor. Up to 3 enforcers with the default loadout, which is going to be your wrist blade and your laser pistol, one of which can become a medic. I don't hate wrist blades. They're actually pretty solid for a base melee weapon. I'd like to at least see phase claws be an option for the retinue. And it's weird that it's not, because it's an option for the base unit. It's an option for the captain, but the captain can't have any friends with phase claws. That does seem weird. And maybe it's an oversight, maybe it's not. But overall, I think it's worth to take a couple of assault enforcers just to have that charge deterrent. One phase claw isn't enough to make people go, ooh, I don't want to charge that. But maybe a phase claw and a couple wrist blades will make somebody go, ooh, I don't want to charge that, because the phase claws are only swinging 3 dice. But when you start getting it up to 5, 7, 9, now you're talking like, I'm going to put some real damage out. Like I said, I think the aura is really good. Like, that extra movement is just nutty. You can cover almost 1/3 of the board in one direction and 1/5 of the board in the other. And so it lets units really just steal objectives, charge things that they normally wouldn't be able to. The increased threat range is worth it to me. Then we have the Jet Bike Lieutenant. It's 90 points base for a standard jet bike profile with an additional hit point, and obviously it brings 2 black command dice. The aura is kind of meh. It's a 6-inch aura of Headstrong.
And again, there's nothing wrong with it, but 6 inches means you're basically only giving it to 1 or 2 units in most situations. You're going to torpedo it over to a spot to make sure that headstrong gets where you want it, and that's going to effectively be it. The Enforcer Captain Order, in my opinion, is just better. It's 15-inch range, if I remember right, and then, sure, it doesn't affect vehicles, but at the end of the day, it just guarantees you're removing pin markers. You're not having to roll for them. So it's kind of weird. Maybe if it had a bigger aura, it'd be worth it. I don't know. Like I said, the 2 black command dice is better than no black command dice. So overall, it's not bad. And then the Dominator and Jet Bike Assault. And then Dominators, I've said it a million times, I think they're great rifles. The Retinue, you can take more jet bikes. But oddly, when you take more jet bikes, they're 40 points with the lieutenant, but they're 45 points in their own unit. 2 jet bikes is 90 points in their own unit, but an extra jet bike is 40 points. So again, I'm not sure what's up with the discrepancy here. I don't know if it's intentional. I don't know if it's not. It just seems very weird. And then we have the Peacekeeper Captain. Obviously, it's resilient because it's a Peacekeeper. 1 green command die. Controlled fire. 3 hit points. 7+ armor. 110 points base. Homie's worth it. Homie is worth 110 points. The command order is Firestorm Aura. All friendly units within 12 gain weight of fire 1 and vicious shoot keywords. It makes everything in your army more efficient unless it just doesn't have a gun. So this aura is hands down like an auto take to me just because it makes everything better. Base loadout is the Dominator and the Wrist Blade. It's a 0-point upgrade for Phase Claws, and honestly, especially for the Captain, I would just take the Phase Claws. The Wrist Blade's fine, but again, the Captain getting Phase Claws gives it an additional attack at AP2 and Elite, because the Peacekeeper Phase Claws are AP2. Now, for the Retinue, on the other hand, you can take up to 3 more Peacekeepers, and each one comes with a Dominator and Energy Gauntlet. And that's a fantastic loadout. The gauntlets are AP2, Seismic, 2 attacks. It is a points upgrade to replace them with Phase Claws, but having those Dominators means you're going to be able to take advantage of your controlled fire. So to me, that's 100% worth it. And honestly, depending on how many Peacekeepers you bring, the Captain should have Phase Claws, in my opinion. If you bring 4, right, you can bring 3 Peacekeepers plus the Captain. If you bring 4, you might take 2 with Phase Claws and then 2 without. You do want to make sure you have Dominators if you take, the bodyguard models. And that's just so you can take advantage of controlled fire. Otherwise, you're not using your keyword that you have inherently. Don't get me wrong, all Phase Claws is hilarious, and I would consider doing it just because those things slap, but at the same time, you're forfeiting your ability to use controlled fire, and you're spending more points. So it just seems kind of weird not weird. It just doesn't seem very intelligent or good to go that route. And Phase Claws, man, especially on the Peacekeepers being AP2, they are now a threat into basically anything except for things with heavy armor, and even into some of those, that's worth the risk. If you've got 3 of them, if you've got 2 boys with gauntlets, 2 boys with Phase Claws, the Phase Claws are going to throw 6 dice, hitting, if you get the charge, like a good charge, you're going to hit on 3s, re-rolling 1s, so you're probably going to get 5 hits on average, maybe 4. And then at AP2, like if you're hitting a Strider, you now need 5s. So of your 5 hits, you're going to get 2.5 hits. Of your 2.5 hits, you're going to get 1 that goes through on heavy. So again, you're going to average a single damage with the Phase Claws. But then if you've got 4 attacks with your gauntlets, you're probably going to average another 1, maybe 2 with the gauntlets. And unless it's just like a melee-centric Strider or something along those lines, there's a good chance you still win that assault then. And then energy gauntlets, like I said, when you've got gauntlets, they really become more of an elite killer type of unit, and that just leads into what I just said. But having the dominators does give them, 3 dice to shoot at, so you can kind of do a little chip damage on hordes and stuff like that. So again, they don't have a bad option. In recap, I think Enforcers have some really good command units. Even the worst command units really have something to offer. And, most of the ones that I would say are bad really just require some sort of theming or list construction to be effective, like the Pathfinder Lieutenant. So let's go ahead and take a look at how I would rank them. We're going to start with the best and work our way down. I think the Peacekeeper Captain is just the best overall. It buffs almost your entire army. Again, unless you just don't have a gun. It's very resilient. It's just one of those, it just makes everything around it better. You have good options with Dominator rifles, Phase Claws. It can be a very versatile unit. Energy gauntlets. You have so many good options for your retinue, for the Peacekeeper Captain. Everything about it is just good. And then you couple it with the fact that it just makes everything around it better. I've yet to play a game without it. And honestly, I don't know that I want to. I would much rather keep bringing it, knowing that it interacts the way it does. It also brings a green command die. So homie's always going to give you at least one command point. And so again, it's just, I've never played without this captain. When I did the tournament at Michigan GT, that was the only command unit I had. And at no point was I like, man, I wish I had something else. Or was I like, man, I wish I had more. That one captain was phenomenal the whole tournament. Up next, I think the Assault Enforcer Captain ranks in second place. It's fairly cheap at 80 points. It does give you an orange command die. And like I said, I think it's one of the best orders Enforcers have access to. 3 extra inches of movement and a 9-inch bubble for non-vehicles really gives you a lot of mobility that you wouldn't otherwise have. And like I said, the way I play them, they have to keep moving. We have to keep pushing. And what I mean by that is, and I'll probably do a video kind of explaining that in a lot more detail, and I already have once, but I'll really kind of explain it. I tend to start the game very, very packed in, and then I'm just constantly moving every turn, spreading out. So, for the way I play them, that is just an auto-include for me. I can now move 9. There's a good chance I can hit that objective and still shoot you, for example. I do think his retinue is a little underwhelming because there's not really any options, but there's no reason not to take them because, again, countercharge with more attacks is just better than countercharge with less attacks. And like I said, Phase Claws on the captain are worth it, so I would just take them. I think next up, and it's probably, I don't even think it's close, and a lot of it's just because I think the aura is so situational. The Enforcer Captain, it is the same exact chassis as the Assaulta Captain, but you're replacing the melee loadout with laser rifles. And so, not bad. The solid but situational order of remove a pin within 15 inches for non-vehicles can really be helpful for keeping your units moving and in the fight. So again, I don't think it's a bad order. It's just one of those where when I look at an order, I'm like, okay, could I see myself using this every turn? Could I see myself using this every other turn? And so to me, I don't see myself using the Enforcer Captain order every other turn. I think most games I probably use it 2 to 3 turns at best. So if I'm only using it half the game, that's kind of how I weigh, do I want this order, do I not want this order? Firestorm, use it every turn. The Assault Enforcer Captain, I would use it effectively every turn. Maybe there's 1 or 2 where I don't, board state depending, but that's an order I could see using every turn. So there's just, that's kind of how I weight the command orders is, would I use this every turn? Like I said, the retinue's kind of weird. Defenders are worth taking, even if it's just one for the armor bump. And then another orange command dice. So very, very solid unit. Nothing wrong with taking it. And controlled fire, it gets to shoot when you charge it, etc. So again, it's there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing right with it. It's very middle of the road. It's like the beige of command units. Up next, I really had to put forward observers and pathfinders as a tie. And a lot of that is because, they're both good, but they're both situationally good. The pathfinder is solid as long as you're playing pathfinders. But when it's by itself, it doesn't really do anything for the army. So, I mean, if you're just wanting to spend 50 points for another command die, maybe that's worth it to you. But to me, the Pathfinder requires too much list tailoring and is too situational to be higher on the list. Now, the FO has a great order, but it does require you to use a long action to steady aim in order to take advantage of it. And while this is good, it requires a more static playstyle to maximize. So that's not for me. So again, you might have had great success with it, and it might be very good, and maybe you just kind of put it next to a unit that isn't going to move. Like maybe you put it on the table specifically to buff like your missile launchers or something along those lines. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just like I said, for me, I look at it and I'm like, this isn't me. I'm not a stand and shoot player. I'm a shoot, move, communicate, get into melee, right? So I'm constantly go, go, go. And that's why, to me, it can't really be any higher either, is because it's taking away from my play style and what I do well. So again, you may have better experience with it. I'm just saying, from the way I approach the game, it's just not for me. Now, the FO does bring 2 black dice, and the Pathfinder brings 1, so like they both bring command dice, and I think they both have their place. What puts them so low on the list, or the tier list to me, is just that they require a bit more list tailoring. We look at the Peacekeeper, he buffs everything. We look at the Assault Enforcer Captain, he buffs everything. We look at the Enforcer Captain, it removes pin tokens from everything that isn't a vehicle. So all of these things affect most of your army. Whereas these really just require units to interact with them. Like they require specific units to interact with them. And that's more why they're so low. And arguably, I wouldn't even say that they're bad. It's just that they're situational. And that situational aspect is what keeps them from being higher. And then last we have the Jet Bike Lieutenant. And honestly, I look at that thing and I think it's awful. I think it's a waste of points. It doesn't do almost anything for your army that you can't get somewhere else. The order is okay, but it is a 6-inch range. So like I said, like you're going to pop that order and then you're maybe going to sprint it at something so that you can double activate to kind of headstrong it in order to remove that pin token before, you see what I'm saying? Like you're going to, basically that's to me how you would use it, is like, oh, I'm going to pop this order. Now I'm going to move 18 inches so I could go be next to something. Then I'm going to spend a command point to double activate. And now I'm going to headstrong to remove its pin token. And that's a lot of hoops to jump through when you could either just deal with the pin token, or if it's not a vehicle, just use your Enforcer Captain who has a 15-inch range to remove pin tokens. So it's just a redundancy. And then it's just 90 points for a jet bike with 1 extra hit point and 2 black command dice. And that just, like I said, it just seems really expensive for what it does. Regular jet bikes are 45 points each. So I could just take 2 jet bikes for the cost of the lieutenant. I don't get headstrong and I don't get the black command dice, but I get 2 guns and I get 4 hit points. So I get more hit points and more shooting rather than a jet bike, right? Like that is situationally good. And oddly, when you look at the jet bike's retinue, like I said before, the fact that their jet bikes are 40 points instead of 45 when you add them onto the lieutenant still doesn't justify the cost here. I could take 1 lieutenant for 90 and then 2 jet bikes for 80. That's 170 points. I give it 7 hit points worth of jet bikes that can give out a 6-inch aura of headstrong. Cool. But really, for 45 points, right, I can take 4 jet bikes. That's 180. So for 10 points more, I can get 1 more jet bike. And then I can even spend 15 points more to give me a total of 25 points more than the lieutenant. But now it has a missile launcher. Or for 5 points more, it has a burst laser. So not only can I give them more bodies, more hit points, and more guns, I have gun options. So again, I look at the jet bike lieutenant and I just fail to see, outside of like if you're playing some sort of themed, really cool army, I fail to see a purpose for it because it doesn't do anything that other units in your army don't do. And it's expensive. Like, if it were a little cheaper, sure, I could probably get behind it. But at its price, it just feels expensive for what you're getting out of it. Next episode, we're going to talk about specialist unit options, and then I will be doing a live stream, possibly today, probably Thursday morning-ish. We'll see. But that is going to do a list preview for my Veerman list for a tournament that is coming up. So Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to take a deep dive in the Enforcer Specialist units, and we're going to take a look at all of them. And this is going to be formatted just like the previous videos where we look at what I think's good, what I think's bad. But before we do it, we do a general overview of all of them. So, like I said, take a look at those specialist options, how they look at each unit individually, how they could be used, maybe talk about some orders that are good with them, and then as usual, we'll go from best to worst. I didn't make slides for the best to worst. We'll just kind of talk about it once we're done rather than go through a slideshow of it. I figured that would actually work a little bit better. Before we do dump into it. Before we do jump into it, let's do that instead of dumping. If you like Firefight or you've never played and my videos have made you interested in Firefight, make sure you take a look at my Amazon affiliate link in the description. It's for the 2-player battle box. There's also going to be one for command dice. And then if you like the videos, make sure you're hitting like. If you like them, subscribe. That goes a long way to help me make more content. Thank you. And now, what we're all here for. So we're going to go in order as they appear in the app before we talk about like how they stack up against each other. So we're going to start with the Enforcer drones. They're 55 points. They come with anti-grav, construct, elusive 2, and evade. And all of this is on a 2 hit point, 5+ armor chassis. And that's for 2 drones. Anti-grav, pretty good. If you're an Enforcer player, you understand how it works. Almost all your stuff has it. Construct is handy. And like I said, when I did the tournament, I'm kind of a goof. Idiot! I forgot they had construct. And to be fair, I don't even think I knew what construct was when I did the Michigan GT. So those things were getting pinned left and right. I didn't know what I was doing. I never used elusive. And I still, even without using construct and without using elusive, I still felt like those were worth their points. Elusive is kind of like resilient, but for the hit roll. But what that also means is there's no AP that can shut it off. So if you shoot me with 3 dice and 2 of them succeed, I can use elusive 2 to make you re-roll both those dice in an attempt to get you to try to fail them. And there's no AP threshold that shuts it off like with resilient. So elusive is pretty good. I like it a lot. And now that I remember that my units have it, I've been able to use it a bit more. So it's pretty handy. I like the Accutech shotguns that they come equipped with stock. Their default loadout, short range, it is 12 inches, but it's 3 dice with pinning. And that means they're a great utility unit for just kind of moving up and trying to shut off charge reactions or trying to mitigate your opponent's action economy. If you're playing against a bunch of MSU, as we call them in the Warhammer world. I assume there's probably similar or the same terminology in Firefight, but MSU is like minimum sized units, and that's where people are just taking, well, I only have to take 7 of these rats, so I'm only going to take 7, but I'm going to take a lot of units of them to get like more action economy. And things like the Accutech shotguns, the burst lasers, anything that hands out pin tokens is going to be helpful in mitigating people who are just spamming a bunch of cheap units to get a ton of actions. They do have some options. Really, it's just I believe it's a 3rd drone you can take, and you either get a stealth drone, a mine layer. It may be an upgrade for one of the first 2 drones. I don't remember. But anyway, stealth drone, mine layer, or command drone. Now, the stealth drone gives them stealthy, obviously, which is a -1 to hit, which it's not bad. Again, it depends on what you expect out of this unit. But stealthy with elusive could be a good stack, because if you're already -1 to hit, an enforcer unit goes from hitting on 4s to hitting on 5s into these drones, which means every die roll is just a 50-50. So elusive 2 could actually, stacked with stealthy, be worth it. Mine layer is for 5 points. When they are assaulted, they cause 3 automatic hits with AP1 before combat begins, and it counts towards combat resolution. To me, this is the one you take.
I like that.
This thing's awesome. Like, yeah, stealth is good. It'll help keep them on the table. But what I tended to use them for is like charge buffers. Move them up, slap something with a pin token, and just kind of move block things. And if you want to shoot them, fine. They're cheap. You could shoot them, and maybe they die, maybe they don't. But if you want to charge them, now you've got to take these 3 hits, and then couple that with the fact that if they haven't activated, they have evade. So not only do I get to do some 3 AP1 hits to you, I also get to move away from you.
So I'm your daddy now.
The command die is 10 points. It gives 1 black command die. I just don't think that's worth 10 points. And maybe you do, and maybe your list is set up to use it. But my experience is you just have better access to command dice from your commanders. Now, they don't have trademark weapons, so there's not a lot of orders that are going to be beneficial to them. And honestly, you probably don't want to spend a ton of orders or command points on them unless it's very important to what it is you're trying to accomplish in that moment. Like, this is not a unit that I would plan to spend command points on. I'm not looking at this going, well, they're going to need go, go, go every turn or anything like that. They're just cheap. You can move them up. You can throw some pin tokens out. They can screen from things coming out of reserves. So they just have more of a utility feel to them. And this is just breaking down everything I already said. Like I said, the stealth drone's solid. It is armor 5, so they're gonna be less durable. And again, mine layer. I just think the mine layer is the best option here. Your mileage may vary. The stealth is probably the second best, and I don't think it's a big difference. I could make very strong cases for either one, but 10 points for a black command die just feels like a waste of points. Like I said, there's just better things out there that are going to give you command dice, going to give you command points. Now we're going to talk about the Pathfinder monocycles. I love these models. Love them. I don't have any yet. They are on my list of models to pick up so I can add them to the pile of shame. They move 12 inches. They sprint 18. They have advanced training, scout, wield, evade, and of course bulky because they can't get in transports. Fast units, they move 12 inches. They do have a pre-game move just like the jet bikes. Really, they're a lot like the jet bikes. They just don't have anti-grav. And they do have sniper rifles as opposed to like the Dominators. But the sniper rifles are AP2 with targeting systems and the sniper scope, so they're not terrible. It is one shot, so you're not getting a ton of volume. But into something like an Enforcer Squad, or where people have like armor 6, maybe even armor 7, like some Peacekeepers, and I'm sure there's other units out there. Some of the Forge Father stuff, unfortunately, that's all heavy armor, so maybe the sniper rifles aren't going to feel as good there, simply because you're just like, oh well, I got a damage, but maybe I didn't. you know. So, but yeah, no, the snipers are going to do really well into more elite builds and elite armies. You know, if you're playing against Plague and they just have a bunch of leapers and a bunch of Teratons, those sniper rifles are going to feel pretty good. The cloaks give stealthy for 10 points. Again, anytime there's like a Pathfinder unit that has a stealthy option, I just don't even understand why it's an option. And I'm not putting down anybody in any way. I'm just looking at it going, well, to me, I'm just spending the 10 points because they're armor 5 and I don't want them to die and they need to be able to interact with the game. This isn't a unit whose range is, well, this one isn't too bad, but some of them's range isn't so long that they can just outrange things. And, you know, the way the game plays, I'm going to get you eventually anyway. So that stealthy does help kind of keep them on the table a little bit longer. 70 points for 2 of them, and then 30 points for each additional. And I think for the speed and the shooting that they deliver, I think that's a good price. The fact that they have targeting systems is handy. I don't know that I would split fire with them that often. Again, it's a low volume, so you're really pushing your luck when you've only got a handful of models that are shooting one shot each, and you're just like, well, I'll split fire. Yeah, see?
I ain't gonna take any chances. You're hanging around with me, see?
There's a saying in our play group, there's no commitment like overcommitment, you know? And it's true. A lot of times when we split fire in the games that we play, like when we've played 40K in the past, it usually doesn't go the way we think it should, because dice just be dice, homie. I think Go, Go, Go is a fantastic order for this and really anything that moves 12 inches. What that lets you do is, and I'm going to cover this again, I promise, but it lets you move out, shoot, and then move back, right? You can cover 24 inches of ground with that order and a unit like this, and it's just fantastic. Ready for Anything is another great order for them because they do have evade, so you could move, shoot, and, you know, go into Overwatch, or you could just steady aim, go into Overwatch, and that steady aim could get important, you know, just because you may need to ignore some modifiers there. The Peacekeeper order is fantastic on them. It gives them way to fire 1, and I believe it's vicious shooting. Sounds right without looking it up. And again, you're going to see a theme with this Peacekeeper order because there's almost no unit in this army that Peacekeeper captain's order isn't good for. You could make the argument that the Assault Commander's order is pretty good. It's 3 extra inches of movement. I don't know that I would need 15 inches of movement. I feel like that's more beneficial on your infantry that moves 6, or things with anti-grav, so you can hop vehicle or hop buildings instead of going around them. So I don't know that it's as beneficial to them as it would be to, say, jet bikes. Sniper teams are just a standard Enforcer chassis, armor 6, blah, 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 blah. They do have Marksman, which is reroll hits of 1. They do have Scout, which is the pregame move, and they come with Stealthy stock. And they have 3 models. 2 of them have sniper rifles, and then the Sergeant has the Gendling laser rifle. There's not a lot to say about them. They are just effectively slower versions of the monocycles and just a little bit cheaper. So again, it's not that they're bad, it's not that they're good, it's just that I think they kind of fill the same role just a little bit differently. You know, and there's nothing wrong with either of them. They're both solid takes. You know, they don't have a charge reaction, which is kind of weird. I don't know if that's an error or if that's intentional, but in the app, in the companion app, there's no charge reaction. And I think that's one of 2 Enforcer units that I've seen so far that don't have them, and that's why I'm curious if it's an error and not intentional, but I'll dig into it. We'll find out. All of the orders that benefit the bikes are really going to benefit the snipers, so I'm not going to hash through all of those again. You know, I'd just be saying a lot of the same stuff, so I don't feel like we need to do that. There we go. The jet bikes, you know, and again, standard Enforcer profile, armor 6, 2 hit points. They do move 12. They have elusive 1, scout, and evade. Again, elusive, pretty good. I like it. and then evade when you remember you have it is fantastic, especially on things that move 12 inches. Because you can, unless something's really slow, or really fast, I mean like faster than you can force some failed charges, and that's good. They come stocked with the Dominator rifles, and I've said this before, I think the Dominators are overall our best utility rifle. It doesn't have access to all the same orders that the Genling does, but getting one additional shot, getting 3 dice, one additional shot going to 3 dice, and AP1 just means that you don't have to invest as many command points into them in order for them to be effective. And they're really good into all infantry. There's not a single infantry they're going to feel bad into outside of, again, anything with heavy armor like the Forge Fathers. But they can be effective chip damage into lighter vehicles as well. If your opponent's got, not the jet, but the Bronco or the Mule, the Dominators are going to do some damage to that thing. Just through weight of dice, because those things are only armor 6, so your damage rolls are going to be a 50-50 at AP1. So again, Dominators to me, worth it. If you can bring units with Dominators, those things are awesome. And then you can take one jet bike in the unit, and it'll either have a missile launcher or a burst laser, and it just depends on what you expect to get out of that unit. If you bring the missile launcher, you have a missile, which is great for cracking armor. You can throw 1 or 2 missiles from these random units. Like if you've got a couple of shooty enforcer operative units with missile launchers, and then you've got a bike with missile launcher, you now have 3 different missile launchers on the table, and your opponent has to be wary of them. They have to understand that at any point, one of those AP4 devastating 2 missiles is going to come down, and it's going to do damage, and if it hits a vehicle, the vehicle's getting pinned because they're anti-tank. So again, missile launchers are a great take. They are 20 points if I remember right, so they're kind of expensive, but it gives you that anti-tank threat. And then the burst laser is fantastic crowd control, and that's it. You either take an anti-tank or you take crowd control. Again, the burst laser gives you 4 shots at no AP. They do pin, so it's one of those, again, just like I just said with the other unit, if you hit somebody with that burst laser and they've just got a ton of cheap units everywhere, all those pin tokens are going to add up. Now, if they're spending all their command points at the end of the round to remove pin tokens, that's fine, because that's orders they're not giving. And, if they're just leaving the pin tokens, unless they have, I forget what the rule is, but a lot of the plague units have it, where they can charge while they're pinned and they get all their pin or charge stuff. I can't think of what the rule is called, but again, unless they have that rule, it's going to really slow down that assault from assaulting armies, and it's going to slow down shooting armies because now they either move or shoot. Slow down. So that those pin markers on all that non-vehicle stuff is really going to be beneficial. Again, the jet bikes, just like the monocycles, they have a lot of orders that they're going to be good with, but again, go, go, go is one of my favorites. With anti-grav, you can pop them from behind terrain, you can shoot, you can pop back behind the terrain. If you need to, you can leap across the table. Like I said, they move 12 inches, so you're clearing 24. And, they can snatch objectives because you can move 12, shoot, move 12, and your sergeant just has to be within 3 inches of the objective, and then the rest of your unit just has to be within 3 inches of the sergeant. So you could really position it in a way where you could move 24 inches and still snatch objectives from your opponent if they're not controlling them, or if you shoot them off and then come take it type of thing. So go, go, go is, and I think I mentioned this in one of the earlier videos, go, go, go is one of the best orders we have. The problem is that it's not one you're going to use every turn. To me, there's orders that you use every turn, and then there's orders that are situationally really good. To me, this is one of the best, but it's only situationally really good. You're not going to need it every turn. The C3M4 combat drone. It's armor 6. It's 5 hit points, so it's fairly standard when taking into account the profiles of like the jets and all of the other kind of aircraft and smaller, lighter vehicles like the Broncos and the Mules. So it's a very similar chassis. It is elusive too, which does improve its resiliency for the lighter vehicles, because a lot of the lighter vehicles don't really have that type of stuff. You look at, like the Plague Mule mortar, it doesn't have resilience or anything like that. So having anything to help you keep it on the table, super handy. Now, obviously, any kind of really good melee is still going to be bad news bears for this thing, simply because it doesn't have flying, it's just anti-grav, so anything can charge it. Now, it does have charge reactions, it can evade, and it has controlled fire, so you have some options to figure out how you want to keep it out of combat, but that's going to require making sure you activate it very carefully or make sure it has an Overwatch token. The default loadout is a tag cannon, tag rifle, and tag sensor, and it's a solid loadout. There's nothing wrong with it. The cannon is 4 dice at not AP4, it's AP2. Idiot! The sensor array is good, but the only thing about the sensor array is, and this is what I've noticed about a lot of the Pathfinder units, is as standalone units, they're not great. But if you're leaning into Pathfinders to bring like a Pathfinder force, they can kind of stack up and get pretty spicy. And that's where the sensor array is like, hey, this is actually really good, because you can stack that sensor array with some of the stuff you would get from some of the tag and Pathfinder specific orders, because the sensor array is not an order. So that's something to keep in mind, is that would stack with some of the other stuff that you already get with the Pathfinders, because of the fact that that's not an order. For 10 extra points, you can, instead of taking the tag cannon, take the particle beamer upgrade. It's 3 dice at AP3 with seismic and weight of fire 2. So, and the thing to remember is the tag cannon has marksman and maybe vicious. It definitely has marksman. I forget what else it has, but it has marksman. So you're only rerolling 1s. But with this thing, you're going to be able to just reroll 2 dice, and they're AP3. So you're going to lose a little bit of volume, which is, 1 die, but you're going to get to reroll any 2 dice instead of only 1s. And then they're AP3, so you're more likely to damage. So you're going to sacrifice just a touch of volume for a little bit more accuracy and higher AP. And it seems good, like I would play it, I would give it a try. I don't see anything wrong with the tag cannon, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with saying I'd rather have the particle beamer. Looking at the missile system, I just don't think they're worth 15 points. Again, I understand that they're gonna clear hordes, because it's 3 shots and each shot is blast D4. So, if you spiked, those 3 shots could turn into 12 shots. And sure, that's awesome, but honestly, they're going to average probably only 5 or 6 shots, which isn't terrible. But for 15 points, you're going to average 5 or 6 shots with no AP. They do have anti-aircraft, but a lot of the aircraft I've seen is armor 6, so you're still damaging it on 6s. And just from my perspective, I'd rather just have the 4 consistent dice that reroll 1s baked in of the tag cannon at AP2, because sure, I might be -1 or -2 to hit that aircraft, but I get to reroll any 1s, and if I do get hits through, I'm way more likely to get the damage through. And it's really, to me, what the missile system is you're just throwing a bunch of shit at the wall to see what sticks.
Psych, it's dog poop. It's great.
Overall, it's a solid unit. I feel like it's going to underperform if you don't have Pathfinders in your army that are supported by it, but I feel like it could probably overperform if the list is tailored around it, or maybe 2 of them. The forward observer order, to give it extra range, gives a 42-inch range particle beamer, that's kind of gross. And the 30-inch range tag cannon is also kind of gross. The tag sensor array going in up to 18 inches is also helpful. Remember, you do need to take the steady aim action, so you wouldn't be able to move if you did that. But if you're over 12 and under 18, it might be worth it. If if that's how you're playing and you have those characters, it might be worth it to use that FO order in order to steady aim, get the extra range, negate some penalties, stuff like that. So again, I think the FO order is pretty good for it. ready for anything is phenomenal because you can just go into Overwatch. So you can move it up, park it where you need it, shoot the dice you need to shoot, give it Overwatch. You can steady aim it, give it Overwatch. Doesn't matter. You know, it's one of those like that. That's a fantastic order. That is one, again, and I've done the video on it. The orders for this army are just so good. And, you know, that was the biggest, and I'm going to get on a tirade here, a little bit of a tangent. That was one of the biggest things going to the Veerman that I struggled with, was just like, man, these orders kind of suck. And it's not that they're bad, it's just that the Enforcer's orders are that good, you know. And again, Peacekeeper Captain Aura gives it weight of fire and vicious, so it does help make sure your sensors hit, you know, stuff like that. So again, it's just the Peacekeeper Captain Aura, awesome, helps everything, so versatile. Peacekeeper Defenders. This is an interesting unit. I like them. They do get 2 melee attacks at AP 1. I kind of wish they had gauntlets, and maybe I'm just being stingy. Excuse me, because I'm like, hey, I play this army, and this army would benefit from better melee. So this would benefit me, you know? So I recognize there might be a little bit of bias there, but I feel like they should have energy gauntlets. I don't know. Maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they should have like a shield bash. I don't know. They just... 2 attacks at AP1 means you're not charging them into most things because they're such a small unit. You know, if you've got a unit of 2, that's 4 attacks. What am I going to do with 4 attacks besides lose an assault? You know? And that's kind of where I'm thinking about it. Now, maybe you could charge them into lighter vehicles, stuff like that, but you definitely don't want to send them into anything with a good melee profile. Not because they will die necessarily, but because they're not likely to win the assault. And if you're not killing your opponent, you still need to win in the assault. You know, and that's, again, I've talked about that. Melee is less, in my mind, about doing damage and more about controlling your opponent's action economy. If they can out-activate me, how can I control that? Well, I can beat them in assaults and shut off units, and if I do kill them, that's even better, because that's less activations they're going to have overall. But if I win the assault, they get a pin token, they get marked as activated, end of story, I don't have to worry about it. So, you know, and even like some of the bigger vehicles, you know, when I played against Forge Fathers, that's kind of how I approached their tank, was I'm just going to send the tunneler into it, I'm going to charge it, I don't have to kill it. I just have to do more damage than it does, and I did, so it got marked as activated, bam, I don't have to worry about that thing shooting at me anymore. And that's really what I had to do with a lot of that stuff in their army, is just, I just need to do more damage than you do to me, because I just need you to not be able to hurt me. And so, like, my Nightmares, sent them in, killed a few models. They only did a couple damage back because of the anti-tank on the big drills, and won the assault. They run away, they're marked as activated. Next turn I can immediately just charge back in. You know, so it's one of those, like, understanding how to use assault to control your opponent's actions is going to help you just play better. A little bit of a tirade there. But anyway, Peacekeeper Defenders, like I said, they're kind of expensive at 100 model. Oh my gosh!
Surprise!
Little homie back here sneezing up a storm. Kind of expensive for 2 models, but I do think they're worth it. You know, they have Resilient 1. Remember, Resilient does get shut off by AP 3, but they're Armor 8, they have Countercharge, they have Controlled Fire, and they have Defensible. And Defensible allows you to Overwatch for free at the end of your activation. So I can move and shoot and then go into Overwatch. And that just means that you know, they can effectively always Overwatch. Now, this isn't always the case. You know, obviously, if somebody hits you with a pin token, oh well. If you lose a melee, oh well. They come stock with Dominator rifles, and I'll say it again, some of the best all-around utility guns in the army. They're fantastic. They can take one special weapon, an incinerator, or a burst laser. They're both 5 points. I've told everybody how I feel here. I think the burst laser is just a better take for the points. I've had people tell me that incinerators are actually really good, and I'll probably give them a try. You know, it's one of those, like, I'm just not in a rush to, because I've not been disappointed with the burst lasers. You know, the volume, the pinning, it just feels more versatile to me. Being able to take them, and while the Forge Fathers, for example, have Headstrong, the fact that I can at least force them to roll a die before they interact, you know, and they're Nerf 3, so they're just as likely to make Headstrong as they are to make the Nerf check from the Incinerator, and I don't have to be as close to use the Incinerator or the Burst Laser. So I can throw pin tokens out on armies like Forge Fathers, even though they can shed them fairly easily. I can force them to roll dice. I can hand pin tokens out against elves. Elves are harder to hit, but they're easier to kill, so I get a higher volume of dice. Now, arguably, you could make the case that Incinerators into elves are going to feel better just because you can't modify those hit rolls. But it's just one of those, like, cool, but they're probably making their Nerf check too, and then I'm not handing out a pin token. So it's just one of those, to me, I just feel like the burst lasers are more versatile. The Incinerators are probably better matchup specific, if that makes sense. I always feel like they should have another hit point. Because damn, them boys thick, you know? And that's really just because I come from a 40k background where bigger models have more hit points. And this isn't the case in Firefight. And I'm not complaining. I'm not saying that they should have more hit points. I just, especially when I first started playing, I just really expected them to be a bit more durable with another hit point. And it just wasn't the case. And I had to just understand, like, these were unreasonable expectations set by me, not an issue with the game. And now that I've kind of figured out how they work and tempered those expectations, they perform a lot better for me, you know. But like I said, that's just one of those things where that's me. There's nothing wrong with the unit. I'm just like, man, these look big. They should have another hit point. They've got this big shield. That's another hit point. But what the shield actually does is send them to armor 8 and then also give them defensible. So there isn't an order that wouldn't benefit them. Now, they don't have trademark weapons, so there's a lot that they don't get access to. But if you've got the forward observer, 24-inch range dominators are fantastic. The extra movement from the assault captain is good. 9-inch movement on your infantry is really good. The Peacekeeper aura is always good. Always good. Again, I don't mean to stress it, but that Peacekeeper captain, there's a reason it's been in every list I've ever made for this game for my Enforcers, and that's because it's just that good. Well, we're going to talk about heavy support. I think this is the last one, and then we'll kind of talk about them a little bit in terms of which ones I think are the best, which ones I think are the worst. I don't think there's a lot of clear-cut winners and losers in specialists. You know, I think because they're specialists, that makes it a little harder to rank them because you're ranking things that serve a different role. They're specialists. So the heavy support's a standard enforcer. Again, no controlled fire. I'm not sure if it's intentional or not, because this is, like I said, one of maybe 2-3 total units in the whole army that I've seen that don't have any kind of charge reaction, not including any kind of vehicles, but I think some of the vehicles do too, because like the Striders have them. I don't know about the Jet. I'd have to look. It's effectively 5 boys with missiles. You know, you can take the Genling laser on the Sergeant, but there's not really a reason to, other than points. It only gives you 1 additional shot, and it's no AP. It is trademarked, so if you wanted to spend command points on it to buff that 1 rifle, you could. But we've already talked about that when we talked about the troops. If you're going to do that, just take a whole unit of them with Genlings, and then just maximize the efficiency of your command points by going, okay, here's 10 shots with anti-vehicle and AP1. Here's this, here's that. So that's more my thinking on it, is if you have the points, it should have the missile. There's no reason not to. Again, I think the missiles are great. We talked about them a little bit earlier. It's 1 shot at AP4, anti-aircraft, anti-tank, devastating 2. Not devastating D2, and that's an important distinction. These are going to do 2 damage all the time. And targeting systems, again, You can split fire.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
The only reason I probably would is if I'm just trying to hand out pin tokens rather than actually damage things. And again, that's going to be kind of matchup specific. If I go into an army that has a lot of headstrong, I'm not so worried about the pin tokens when I could potentially just kill the thing with my missiles. But if it doesn't have a lot of headstrong, like if I've got a couple of tunnelers, for example, across the table from me, I might split fire just to hand out pin tokens to both those tunnelers to try to slow those down, because I know what they're about. You know, they're coming to bash butts and mix guts, as old TK says.
Nothing gets old TK ready to go like a good old-fashioned butt bashing, and that's just what we're here for.
They are high cost. They're about 200 points, 210 if you take the missile on the sergeant. So you have to play them intelligently. You can't just kind of like, I'm going to leave them here and shoot things. And I think Go, 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 again, is probably your best friend here because it allows you to pop out, shoot, and pop back. And it's just one of those where anything you can do with this unit that allows you to shoot and not get shot at, that's what you want to do. You know, obviously, if your opponent has like a plague mortar or something like that, if they're smart, that's what they're going to target right away. Oh, you've got missiles? I'm not playing with that. Let's get rid of those right now. The nice thing about the fact that they don't have countercharge is there's certain orders you don't have to worry about using on them. You know, you don't need them to go into Overwatch. You don't need them to activate late to maximize the potential for their controlled fire or their countercharge. You know, so if you've got a good shot, you can just take it and not have to worry about whether or not you're going to miss out on something. The extra range is cool, but like I said, they have 36-inch range. And then, hey, guess what? Peacekeeper Aura, real good for them. Way to fire and vicious, real good. If you've got an opponent who's playing a lot of short range and they can't really tag your missiles, then arguably, like, you're fine. You could just leave them out in the open for a turn or two, take some shots, and then start worrying about moving them. And they don't have to do damage to be effective. And that's another thing to keep in mind. And I could draw some parallels here. So when I did the Michigan GT, I had the Strider with the Polaris cannon. And we're going to talk about support next week. And I love, like, the Striders, hands down, some of my favorite units and even models in this army. Like, they're up there with the monocycles. A good example of deterrence being a viable strategy is I played Mason Labs round 3, and actually round 2, my game against Jordan. But round 3 really sticks out to me because that was the most, I don't want to say egregious, but that's the best word that comes to mind. It's the most egregious example I could think of, where I put the Strider down, he dumped a bunch of shooting into it, and none of it was really anti-tank, so a lot of it just bounced off, because it's armor 7 with heavy armor, so I think he maybe did like a damage to it, and then I got to activate it. Like, I let him shoot a couple things into it, because once the first volley went off and he didn't do anything, I was like, okay, I can let it sit there for one more volley. So I did. And then he shot at it again, didn't do any damage, so I was like, okay, I can let it sit there for one more volley. Because his anti-tank didn't have good lines on it at the time. So then I moved it up finally, and just kind of had it behind a building in the middle of the board. And it was locking down big chunks, because he just didn't want to take any of his bigger stuff out there, because that Polaris cannon is massive. Now, it's fairly short range, but it is 2 shots at AP4, and I think it's devastating D2+1 without looking with anti-tank. And if you give him the veteran pilot upgrade, which I did, it gives him marksman. So it's 4s re-rolling 1s. It was fantastic. And, you know, so it didn't have to do damage, and really it didn't do much that game. But its presence on the table helped dictate the flow of the game. And that's what the missile launchers can do. If your opponent knows that you've got this thing that can reach almost all the way across the board, and it could delete a tank, or really just like cripple something unless it just has a ton of bodies, they're gonna respect it. And that's one of those things, like, again, that's a mindset I have because of Warhammer. You know, a lot of people would tell me how bad Incubi are at the beginning of 10th. And I was just like, well, maybe, but I'm having success with them. but I'm going into it not with the expectation that they need to just kill everything they touch all the time, but I'm going into it with the expectation that if they're sitting in a transport or they're sitting behind a terrain feature, my opponent is going to respect the potential damage output and just give them kind of a wide berth, and they do. My opponent's like, no, I know what those do. They hurt. If your dice are good, I'm picking everything up. I don't want that. So they tend to avoid them. And that's kind of what I mean, is that's where the heavy supports, to me, that's where they shine, is not necessarily the damage that they do, but it's the damage that your opponent thinks they can do. So that's going to cover all the units. Like I said, it's going to be hard to rank them because these are specialists, and it's more just they perform a specific job. They do a specific thing. So if I had to pick one to be the best, I think I would probably pick the heavy support. Yes, they are expensive, but there's a plethora of orders that benefit them. They have a good range, so they don't have to be up in anybody's face. This is an army that's very medium to short range, and this is one of the few things you have that can sit and shoot over halfway across the table. So they are a little bit expensive, but they give you a good threat deterrent, and they give you access to something that's really, really important in that it can just lock down shooting lanes. I would probably pick them as like my number one. Outside of that, man, like I said, I don't know, because all the Pathfinder units. So I would probably put the Pathfinder units on the lower end of the scale. So what would be 2? We've got, let's see, heavy support. I'd probably put the Defenders at number 2. Just because they have the ability to tank objectives a little bit better. They are also kind of expensive, but the Dominators are really good, and again, they can benefit from most auras, and that's really good. I'd probably put them at number 2. I don't really understand how this is a specialist unit. I don't know what they consider a specialty or specialization here. Maybe it's the defensive profile, like they're a tank as opposed to like a high aggro unit. The combat drone I'd probably put at 3. Normally I put Pathfinder stuff lower because it requires Pathfinders to really work. But even just the drone itself is a good vehicle. Like, it's got good guns. The array is useless without more Pathfinders, but at the same time, like, the tag cannon and the tag rifle are pretty good. And everything, like, it's just a solid take. I'd probably put that at 3. Jet bikes, I'd probably honestly put at 4. I might tie them at 3. The issue I have with the jet bikes is mostly that I'm kind of an idiot. And really, I just tend to kind of torpedo them up the board. They need patience. You need to kind of keep them in the back for as long as possible and use them for late game objective grabbing and stuff like that. And that's maybe why we put them at 3 or 4, because they require a bit more finesse to use. They're not a unit that you could just put on the table and have it just instantly feel good. They're a unit that you're going to have to like think about how you want to use them, what you want their role to be, that type of thing. Let's see. I think probably all the drones and all the Pathfinder units just kind of get lumped into the same category. The Enforcer drones, like I said, they're good, they're cheap, but again, it's not a unit that you could just put on the table and be like, this unit's good, it does what I need it to do. You have to have a predefined role for it and understand how you want it to interact and how you want it to work. And then again, most of the other Pathfinder stuff, it just kind of needs other Pathfinders to really function at its best, which is why I never put Pathfinders at the top, not because they're bad, but because they require more Pathfinders. Like, they require list tailoring in order to really use them effectively. Thanks for watching. That'll wrap us up. Next episode, we're going to talk about the support units, so like the Striders and stuff like that. I am also working on a Beerman series that's going to follow a similar structure. We're going to be working with some of the members of the community to take deep dives into some of the other factions, so look forward to maybe some, me chatting with other people rather than just me talking and you hopefully listening. And then, I am also working on a Q&A so we can do a deep dive into some of the rules and stuff like that. I've put it on the Firefight Fanatics Facebook page, but if you have any questions that you want to ask, if you had access to the Rules Committee, which is a group of volunteers who kind of work with Mantic to help understand and fix and interpret rules, if you had access to them, what questions would you ask? Feel free to drop those in the comments.
Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to wrap up our series on Enforcers, and we're going to do a deep dive into the support units. We're going to look at support options for Enforcers and how they look, and we're going to talk about each unit individually and maybe a little bit on how they can get used. A lot of the support stuff's fairly straightforward, so it won't need as much of a dive as some of the, say, specialist units. And then we're going to go through them in the same order as the list builder. And then at the end, as usual, I'll rank them on how I feel they would rank best to worst. And again, just remember that this is subjective, so your experience could be different based on the way you build your lists and the way you play. But before we dig in, let's go ahead and if you are wanting to support the channel, go ahead and there's some Amazon affiliate links in the description for the 2-player starter set, Enforcers versus Marauders, as well as Command Dice, a couple other things. If you buy using those links, there's no additional cost to you, and I just get a small kickback on it. And then, as usual, like and subscribe if you appreciate the content. Thank you. Let's dig in. We're going to start first. Like I said, we're going in order. Strider. It's advanced training, which almost everything in the Enforcers army has it. I'm real hard pressed to think of anything that doesn't. It doesn't mean that there isn't anything there. It's just off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. It does have heavy armor and controlled fire. The base loadout is really good for anti-infantry. You get 6 shots with pinning at 24 inches range. You can upgrade it to a tank buster for plus 25 points, and that brings some nice anti-tank firepower to the table with 2 shots that are anti-tank, and they're Dev D2 plus 1, and all that means is that they're going to do 2 or 3 damage if they go through. The Urban Assault is a solid side grade. It's 0 points, and it gives you a chainsaw, which is 4 attacks at AP 3 with Frenzy 1. Remember, Frenzy lets you reroll a hit roll on the charge, or in melee, so it's just way to fire for melee instead of shooting. And really, the only thing with the Urban Assault side grade is I feel like the chainsaw maybe needs anti-tank, and not even that it needs it. It's just when I look at that model and how big that chainsaw is, and I'm just like, hey, maybe it should do something to heavy armor, even seismic, I don't know. And again, it could be just like my looking at the model thinking this should have this, and it doesn't. Because I come from, like I said, 40k, so like dreadnoughts, when they fight, they crumple armor, so in my head that's what I see this as. AP3 without anti-vehicle, right? Or seismic, without something to counter heavy armor, it just feels kind of weird. And again, even if it got a points increase to get it, that would be fine. I'm just saying it just seems weird. It seems weird, especially when you look at the energy gauntlets. They're AP2 with seismic. So again, it just feels weird. Not that it's good or bad. It just seems a little odd to me. The Heavy Flamer is a pretty solid option because it's got 4 dice, it burns, and it does have controlled fire. So you're going to be able to shoot at things when they charge into you. You can't modify the it burns roll, so you're getting 4 dice that are going to hit on 4s, which is pretty good. You can upgrade it to Marksman for 10 additional points. It's worth it for the Tank Buster for sure. And probably for the base loadout, the base loadout is what? I think it's 6 shots with AP1 pinning and 24-inch range. Marksman lets you re-roll ones. Actually, it makes you re-roll ones. There's an important but subtle difference there. Makes you re-roll ones. And, man, especially for the Tank Buster, that is worth it. Because the efficiency hit you get on that is incredible. Because you're going to get 2 shots hitting on 4s, re-rolling 1s, which means you're only going to miss on 2s and 3s. And on a D8, that's pretty spicy. That's only like a 25% miss rate. And then, if you get it in the Peacekeeper Captain Aura, you're going to give it Weight of Fire 1, which also means you get to re-roll 1 additional die. Right? So, I can re-roll 1s, but if I get 2 2s for my misses, I can re-roll 1 of those 2s to try to pick it up. So on average, you're going to hit both times. They are AP4. That aura would give them vicious. So again, you're going to consistently average getting one of them through with that order. You'll probably still consistently average getting one of them through without the order. But with the order, it drastically increases the likelihood of getting both of them through. Ready for Anything is another good order because you can slap it on it, it can move up, it can shoot, or it can charge or whatever, but then it can just go into Overwatch, so if something countercharges, you get to shoot your flamer at it. So again, Ready for Anything is another good order there. The FO order can be useful for the base loadouts, the Tank Busters or the base one with the laser. But the downside to that is that you can't move when you use it, and I just feel like Enforcers are an army that almost always have to move. You have these smaller units. You don't want to be stuck out in the open. You want to keep moving. And so anything that forces you to sit still, unless it's a dedicated shooting platform, which I guess this would be, you don't necessarily want it sitting still unless it's on an objective. So overall, like I said, I like the Strider. I think they're pretty solid. We'll see where they rank. Then we have the Accuser Interceptor. Now, this data sheet or unit card, whatever you want to call it, is kind of weird because it has a bunch of different loadouts, and each one has a different name, and then each one has different upgrades. So it's almost like 3 different units in one, but because of the way the game is set up, they wanted to keep it into one. And what I mean by that is like if you look at 40K, you have the rule of 3, right? You can only take 3 instances of a data sheet. And if something's got a lot of options and you don't want to just see that get spammed, you just kind of make each loadout a different option on one data sheet rather than each one getting its own data sheet. So that's why I think all of these different loadout options aren't their own unit. They are spread out, or they're condensed into one unit with a bunch of different options. The base loadout, it's got anti-tank, it's got a transport capacity of 5, obviously fly and vehicle, and then if you take the sensors, it gets to redeploy D2 plus 1. So you can redeploy 2 or 3 units, and man, that's an awesome ability, and I haven't really seen a ton of that in this game, but that sensor alone is probably worth taking this jet for. The default loadout is excellent into infantry. It's 8 dice, AP1 and pinning. Missile pods are 10 points, but they add 1 shot with blast and AP1. And I think I touch on this a little bit later. I don't know that that's worth 10 points. The Arbiter loadout replaces the laser with Polaris cannons. It is 20 extra points, but you get 4 shots anti-tank Dev 2. It's basically like 2 Striders condensed into 1 jet. And it's excellent anti-tank shooting, right? Like, it's 24 inches, so that kind of is meh. But it's really, really good. Like, 2 damage, 4 dice, really solid. The Adjudicator loadout adds fusion, and that gives you 4 shots at AP2 with blast D2, which is going to be probably better into more elite infantry, like more like Nightmares or more Enforcers and things like that. But honestly, it does have a points increase, and I forgot to put that on here. But for the points, I'd probably just take the pinning laser cannon. Like, you could spike, right? Because you're getting 4 shots. You're still only getting 8 hits at max. because of blast. So it's one of those, like, I could maybe get 8 hits or 8 shots, right? But I could also just consistently roll 8 dice. Sure, it's AP1 instead of AP2, but it also pins. So like I said, I think for the points, I like the laser better. Any loadout can take the sensor array for 20 points. It does have a few like restrictions, right? Like if you take the sensor array, I think you can't take the missile pods. I'd have to double check that. But like I said, to me the sensor array is 100% worth it. It gives you tactician and adds a black die, and then also the redeploy. And the redeploy alone, in my opinion, is probably worth 20 points. That can be, in the right hands, an incredibly powerful ability. Any loadout outside of the base takes away transport capacity, and that's important to note. So if you go with the Adjudicator or the Arbiter, your transport capacity becomes 0 instead of 5. So if you were looking to make it a transport, that's something to keep in mind. Any orders that benefit the Strider are going to be good for this, so I'm not going to necessarily dig too deep into orders with this, and we're not going to get too crazy with the orders in the supports anyway, just because there's so much overlap. Like, well, the orders that work for this will work for that, and there's not necessarily a need to go through the different orders with the support the way we did with troops and specialists. The Persecutor Bomber is the other jet. It is anti-tank, or advanced training, targeting systems vehicle. Targeting system's pretty handy because you're going to have 2 different guns on a base loadout. One's good into infantry, one's good into tanks, and it lets you separate them. It's hander. Not handier, not even handy. It's hander. God damn. Sorry. Sometimes, man. I didn't take my meds today, so my focus isn't the best. So sometimes, like, I have more typos and stuff like that. The default loadout gives really solid anti-tank and anti-infantry. The Bunker Busters are 2 shots with AP5 and Dev2 and anti-tank. And then the anti-personnel are 4 dice at AP1, pinning, and blast D2. They're relatively short range at 18 inches. And then for 10 points, you add a missile pod, and the missile pod's just the same as the missile pod in the other jet. And again, if you've got the 10 points and you're just like, I don't know what to do with it, sure, you add it. But I don't know that that's something you plan on taking. I think that's something you take if you're just like, oh, I have 10 points to waste. Then we have the Sniper platform. It's 120 points, and it's obviously advanced training, anti-grav, slow, reload. And that's a weird rule. Basically, if you take a regular shoot action to shoot, you get a -1 penalty. But if you take a long action to shoot, and I could be misspeaking on this, so correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But my understanding is if you take a regular shoot action, you incur an additional -1 penalty that stacks with all your other -1 penalties. But if you don't, and you take the long action to shoot, the steady aim, it just negates that. I could be wrong, but basically it's to penalize you for moving and shooting. Instead of just like, oh, you moved, you cannot shoot, it's, oh, you moved, you get an additional -1 to hit. So it is a construct, and construct means no pinning. And that's there because of me. I'm a goose. I've had constructs and forgot that they don't pin. The Polaris Railgun's pretty beefy. It's 2 dice, AP5, anti-tank, Dev D2 +1, and Marksman. So it's 2 dice that are going to hit on 4s, re-rolling 1s. It doesn't have the vehicle keyword, so there's going to be a few more orders that it'll stack with. 48-inch range is, I think, the longest range in the Army. I could be wrong on that. But all in all, it's a pretty solid, pretty meaty platform for just, like, threatening shooting lanes and tanks. Ajax Striders. First of all, I love this little handsome bastard. They're so cool looking. That was actually what made me want to do Striders in the first place. When I first bought the Striders, I didn't realize this was like a special upgrade kit. It's armor 8 with heavy armor, and it's probably the most durable unit in the Army, or at least really close to it. It does have the shield, so that gives it the armor 8 and defensible, so that means you can effectively controlled fire all the time. But it's not going to be super great for controlled fire, and we'll talk about why in a minute. Its 2 shots with the spear are AP2 and Blast D4 at a 12-inch range. So, controlled fire, you're going to hit on 5s on average just because of the -1 for controlled fire, which means you're going to average 1 hit, which means you're going to average 2 hits because of Blast D4, right? 2 to 3. And I look at the chassis, and it looks just a little underwhelming. But I also have to remember that this is arguably not supposed to be an offensive unit, but more of a just like the Peacekeeper Defenders, where you put them on an objective and try to like hide them from bigger shooting and allow their heavier armor and stuff to kind of shrug off the weaker weapons out there. But overall, I don't know. The melee's kind of weird. It's 6 attacks at AP2, but there's, like we've talked about it, there's not really a ton in the Enforcers army that like buffs melee. And it just feels weird. Again, this is another one where like I feel like maybe it should have seismic, because I look at that spear and I'm like, why is that not also just a melee weapon? Right? Like Homeboy looks like he could shank some dudes with it. Why is this only shooting? And again, it could just be, again, coming from other games to this. Looking at this, my expectations aren't realistic. That's entirely possible, and I try to be the first one to admit that. But I look at its offensive profiles, and I'm just like, I haven't put it on the table yet. I'd have to put it on the table to see how I feel about it. But it is armor 8 with heavy armor, and there's not a lot of heavy armor in the Enforcer's army. The Striders might be the only heavy armor units now that I'm thinking about it. So it's one of those things to keep in mind, is that this is going to give you a durability that this army kind of lacks. Like, the infantry are very durable for infantry, but they don't have anything that's kind of like the Wolverine tank, where it's like, I am just durable all the time. So that's one of those, like, kind of weird spots for the army, and the Striders kind of fill that. And I like Striders in general. I think they're very good. But again, it just one of those things where I'm just like, this Ajax Strider specifically is weird. I need to get a couple more Strider chassis, because I have a couple of the upgrade kits, and I'd like to build them out. They're super cool looking models. And then lastly, we have Novashock Peacekeepers. 150 points for a unit of 2 of these. Man, these are expensive. They are, obviously advanced training, resilient, controlled fire. They are armor 8 with resilient 1, and that's nice with 3 hit points. They could be kind of rugged, They're not going to be terrible on the table. Their base loadout is heavy fusion. It's 3 shots at AP2 with blast D2. And that's going to be a solid, versatile weapon for dealing with shields or infantry, light vehicles, stuff like that. But for 10 extra points, you get the heavy thermal rifle. It's 2 shots at AP4 Dev 2. And that's a pretty meaty anti-tank gun. Again, the issue that the Peacekeepers have is, 1, they're slow. They move 5 inches. And 2, their range is fairly short. So they are going to need like a forward observer order, arguably, just to kind of like keep them from falling behind and like getting pulled out of range consistently where you need them to be. They look on paper pretty good. Like I said, they're one of those units where it's like, okay, if you tech into what they do, you can make them probably feel pretty good. You can take up to 4 models, and then extra bodies are 10 points cheaper, and you can mix and match loadouts. So you can take like 2 thermals and 2 of the other ones. The fusions. Sorry. Words are tough. And that's kind of all of them in a nutshell. We're going to go from best to worst as usual. And I will try to list why I have things where I have. And again, just a reminder, like, this is based off my experience with the game and how I play. I tend to play a more melee-centric, more aggressive play style, whereas, like, maybe you play a more static, sitting and shooting play style, and that there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that what you like in the army might be a little bit different than what I like in the army. So up top, I have the base Strider, and again, I just think they're so good. You can give it marksman, So if you take the burst laser, it's 6 shots, hitting on 4s, re-rolling 1s. It's armor 7 with heavy armor. Like I said, off the top of my head, I think Striders are the only heavy armor in the army. I could be wrong on that one, but man, I struggle to think of any. It will shrug off a lot of volume fire. And again, like I go back to the Michigan GT when I played against Mason Labs, and that guy just like dumped a ton of shooting into me. It just didn't do any damage. I did hide it from his anti-tank weapons, but it was just one of those like, I'm going to roll a bunch of dice at you and nothing's going to happen. So that does help my kind of like opinion on it, is knowing that it's actually pretty resilient. Don't get me wrong, you get enough volume, you're going to chip through that heavy armor, but it does help. The Tank Buster loadout, so it's got options. You can make it very good at anti-infantry. You can make it very good at anti-tank. It does have options. It's very good at killing vehicles with a Tank Buster loadout. Whoa. And honestly, the worst loadout is still a good take, and that's the chainsaw with the flamer. And when I say worst, I mean like for what it offers, I just don't know that it's worth taking when compared to like the burst laser. And that's just because of like it has controlled fire. Well, the burst laser's got a longer range. It can give a pin token, so depending on what's charging you, that could be super important. Obviously the flamer can also be really good with its activation, like manipulation. But the more limited range, like it doesn't have anything to buff its chainsaw. It just goes in and slaps, and that's about it. It can benefit from orders that make its shooting extremely efficient. So like I said, like especially the Peacekeeper Captain aura, giving the Tank Buster weight of fire 1 and marksman, and vicious. Like you're getting damage through. It doesn't matter. And I have, I have not played a game with my enforcers in which I haven't taken at least one Strider. Like I just feel like the Polaris cannon is that good, and that platform is that good. Like, I could do potentially 6 damage to you with one shooting, right? Like just shooting once. I think in second, we have the Interceptor, and honestly, the big reason is A, the sensor array, and B, just the variety of loadouts. So you have a chassis that can do a lot of different things depending on how you build it. So that's why I put it here. But like I said, I just think that it is that good. The redeploy is that good that it is worth taking this for that exclusively. If you set it up right, you could be really aggressive with a couple of units to try to like get your opponent to deploy somewhere, and then just like, I'm going to move these 2 units back, or I'm going to move them over here, stuff like that. So it's one of those, like I said, like I haven't put it on the table yet because I'm just not a fan of the jets in this game. But in the context of what you have for support options for enforcers, I do think it's that good. I think the sniper platform's number 3. It could arguably be number 2, depending on how you're using it and how your list is built. But like I said, the 48-inch range, you can lock down some massive shooting lanes. If your opponent has jets, you can just like, pick that up. So it's pretty good. It's not really durable, but that's one of the things I take issue with a lot of the Enforcer support stuff. And really a lot of Enforcers non-infantry units is that they don't have the durability that the infantry does. Almost all of the vehicle chassis are just like armor 6. So they're literally the same armor as a regular Enforcer, and it just kind of feels weird. Peacekeepers are more durable, arguably, than like a jet. Sure, the jet has more hit points, but at armor 7 and resilient 1, the math is not that dissimilar to get like 2 or 3 damage onto a Peacekeeper as it is to get like 6 damage on a regular jet with a no AP gun. Like, yes, the math does still favor killing the Enforcer or Peacekeeper, but it's not as big of a difference as you think. So it's just one of those like kind of weird situations. And I think the rest of them are just kind of fluid between 4 and 6. And a lot of that just stems from the fact that, man, they require some sort of list tailoring to get them to actually work. I think the Novichok Peacekeepers look good, but I think their low speed, short range keep them from really being higher on the list. But if you build into them with like a sensor array and redeploy, you could put them someplace, excuse me, and attempt to use your redeploy to kind of reposition them into a more advantageous spot. So they do have play. I just think it does help to build into them a bit more, whereas 1, 2, and 3, those are items or those are units you could just drop into almost any list and they just function. Armor 8 helps them out a ton, so they're going to be pretty durable. They are resilient 1. Like I said, and they're so damn expensive. 75, 85 for the thermal, and then you get a 10-point deduction for each additional one. So you're looking at 150 base. And if you're going to take 2 of each gun, that's how you do it, is your first 2 just get the fusion, and then your second 2 get the thermal, and then you're spending 300 points for 4 models, rather than like 320 or 330 or whatever it would come out to be. The Persecutor Bomber, I think it just suffers from the same issues that the Novichok Peacekeepers do, and that's that it's got a low range, 18 inches. It makes logical sense, right? Like, I get why the bombs are 18 inches. But with Armor 6, no real defensive buffs available to it, I just don't know that it's worth putting on the table, because if your opponent has any kind of reliable anti-tank, that's going to get picked up almost immediately. And for good reason. And that's one of those, like, the Interceptor isn't a whole lot more points, and it just brings more to the table. The Ajax Strider, like I said, it's rugged, it's durable, it's defensible, it has a lot of positives. And I think it'll tank a lot more damage than it really should because of the heavy armor and everything. But man, is it extremely short range. And AP2 in both shooting and melee, it's gonna get outshined by cheaper units that just do the same thing. The regular Strider has better range and is effectively the same points. And you can just either tech into infantry or anti-tank. It's not as durable, but if you're getting hit with AP3, AP4 anti-tank weapons, I don't know that 12.5% difference in your durability going from Armor 7 to Armor 8 is all that big of a deal. The defensible might be worth just as like a charge deterrent, but again, it's still only 2 shots. So it's not like it's amazing. It's not like it's crazy good. It's just a spear. Overall, I just think it's a unit that really could do with some sort of buff. I don't think it's terrible for its points, and I don't think it needs to stay the same points if you make it better. I'm just saying, like, it needs something to kind of just like make it stand out. Armor 8 heavy armor is pretty good. Don't get me wrong. But I could just take other Armor 8 bodies that are, like, more versatile, that do a bit more. So, like I said, it's just one of those weird things. I think these 3 units kind of are like, it's not that they're bad. They just need a bit more list tailoring, and you can't just kind of plug them into a list and have them perform. And, they still have roles, and they are still pretty solid. Keep in mind that all the vehicles can't control objectives. So you can't even just put the Strider, the Ajax Strider, on an objective and just be like, this is mine. Now, for missions like Control, where you just need it in a table section, then, yeah, you arguably could. And you could attack... you could use it as like, I'm going to just go send it into this unit and try to get a bunch of damage on it. It's going to be really good at light vehicle hunting. But you already have things that do that. So again, it's just like, I don't know. I think we're all on the same page here. maybe. If you've got something that I've missed with the Ajax Strider, again, let me know in the comments. But that's going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching. Next week we get back to Veerman. I do apologize for the lateness and the little bit of rush that this video had. We just have had a lot going on this week. I've had a lot of school stuff, and I've had a lot of GW work that I've had to grind out and get shipped out, and it's just shift my schedule kind of crazy. So again, apologize that this seems a little rushed and is a little late, but I wanted to make sure we wrapped up the Enforcers before we kept digging into the Veerman. Once again, I appreciate all of you. I hope you all have a great day, and we'll see you next time.